Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. I've seen the sun hang like a flame in the sky. Yes, I've seen the sun turn, and I've seen the sun die. And I often think now, before our time is run, will there be any thoughts for what we have done? Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And when the night spills into the darkness of my soul, when the time comes for me to leave you, don't let me go. And you can call out my name, and you can call out my name.
Most pulpits are occupied by good men who are telling people to be good, and then they'll have a chance of heaven. But you know, the real gospel's not that. The gospel is for sinners. You don't have to be good to be saved. You do have to be saved to be good. And whosoever will may come, and all manner of sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven unto men. It's not who you are, it's whose you are. And you can come just as you are. He won't leave us just as we are. We don't have to worry about what God thinks of us. Only what he thinks of Christ, our substitute. When you hear the real gospel of the New Testament, the historic objective gospel that was preached by Christ and Paul, by Luther, by Wesley, then you know you have the verdict of the last judgment the moment you believe. You have everlasting life the moment you believe. You are accepted in the beloved. You're complete in him, despite stumblings, failures, 100 or more a day, not counted against us. Not one drop of the wrath of God can ever fall upon a believer.
Don't fall for the trap that people set up when they say it's not possible to keep the commandments.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. It's great to be here. Let me get my pictures right there. My very special guests today are Andrew Skeggs and Logan Smith. How are you guys?
Good.
Great to have you here. Logan, I don't think you've been on the show at all before.
No, never before, but I've watched from afar many a time.
And we're good mates. We even toured Japan together.
Absolutely.
Wasn't that an absolute blast?
Incredible time. Absolutely incredible.
I've got an idea. It was like a 21 days, I think, from memory, because I remember going to the Philippines maybe soon after, and we either did 17 gigs in 21 days or it was 21 gigs in 21 days. Can't remember which tour it was.
It definitely felt like the latter, for sure.
And of course, Andrew Skeggs, we're mates from way back. I remember you at Avondale, and I'm pretty sure you were editor of the Jacaranda that year, or one of the years. Is that right?
Yeah,
and,
1991.
And
good times, good music that year.
Great times. And I was an outdoor. I think I'd just gone back to do some upgrading. Maybe it was then. And outdoors who hang out at college often kind of wander around between classes. And I'd often go into the room there where you guys were all working, really hard to put out that magazine that year. And we'd end up having great philosophical conversations and really have great memories of times with both of you. So thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, well, that was a big year because that was the year Logan came to Avondale as well. So it was where the three guys got to know each other, which is fantastic.
That's right, the three amigos.
It all began there.
Yeah. So that was your first year, Logan. Your last year, Andrew?
Yeah.
And it was my coming back. Oh, hang on 1 second. You're right. For some reason, our dogs just came running into the studio. And for me, I think I was going back to do some, that was that year, some upgrading of my course. And if I'd finished and only had 3 months to go, one semester, I would have had my MA in counselling. But the call of the wild and playing music full time was too strong. And I would have had a chance to visit Loma Linda that year as well. I wonder what that would have been like back then. Andrew, who were the professors there of note during that early 90s era? Do you know at all?
Yeah, that were good times, mate. That's when you had Richard Rice and
that's
guys
right.
like that in full flight, and Bailey Gillespie and Charles Teal, some really good thinkers. Yeah, guys like Tony Knight and that who went there reckon it was awesome.
Yeah. So
they were churning out a lot of books, I think, at that point, some of those guys, weren't they? There was a lot of publishing going on, and a lot of those really interesting books that sort of were starting to open up the sort of the framework of things happened at that time, didn't it? It was, 1990, 91, 92, that era was pretty amazing, actually.
It was. And for me, and I remember interviewing you, Andrew, in season 2, I think it was. Do you remember what number it was? Because we can point people to it.
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
Yeah, but somewhere there on season 2.
On the list, but anyway.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. As we were saying off air, I thought it was going to be maybe 6 episodes, and that was kind of it. I hadn't done SDA Q&A for a while, and it was my swan song. And it just took off. That interview with Bill Johnson, and I'm watching the people. By the end of that interview, we went from 200 members to well over 1,000 members, and I'm like, what's going on? There's interest here. So it turned from 6 interviews into 86 interviews. And I remember noting when I interviewed you that you were quite up to date with the whole glacier view. You know, you'd observed it, you'd researched it, and I was kind of here in many ways ground zero for Avondale anyway, 81. But I was too interested in surfing and playing music. And in that early years of college, I just didn't really notice what was going on. I did notice lots of youth leaders leaving. I did notice CBs and Fordites and that kind of, but it seemed to me more about standards than the theology. And I didn't quite understand it. But I was impressed that you kind of did know what was going on, and you would have been young at the time as well.
Well, the interesting thing was I wasn't even a Seventh-day Adventist, and my family wasn't in 1980.
That's right.
Yeah, and interestingly, we joined the church at the end of 1981, but our local church in Canberra was just a really happy place, a very tolerant place, unlike a lot of other places.
Well,
but as time goes on, you want to learn history. You know, I'm always interested in history, and so and that particular episode was such a significant event. So yeah, I've always been interested in it.
Well, I kind of started to get interested in it around 1990, 91, and people like Graham Fraunfelder were giving me books, and I discovered the 1919 conference notes, and I discovered some Bill Brinsmead books, and what was it? The 1844 Re-Examined, I think it's called.
Yeah, Robert Brinsmead.
Robert Brinsmead. And so it was mind-blowing for me. It's a fascinating time period, and over those 86 interviews, I really learnt a lot. Now, at some point between there and now, and this segues into what we're going to talk about, and by the way, I am pleased to promote my channel. You can see it scrolling under there. If people want to support what I'm doing, paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music if you'd like to make a donation, but I can't turn it off. So I'm trying to work out how to not seem like I'm just self-promoting the whole episode. Once we start chatting, I'll press some buttons and I'm sure I can work it out. But so between that time and soon after, I actually left the Adventist church. Initially, it was because of the no vote 2015, and I'm sitting there holding my 2-year-old. I can't put my name to that. If people, to me, it's not about theology. That's an unethical thing to suppress women based on gender. And so that was my reasoning. But I'd always questioned the investigative judgment, the sanctuary. That had always been percolating in the background. But those things hadn't really affected me in a way where I would have left the church over those issues. Whereas now I'm like, yeah, actually, to me, they're quite substantial things that people can talk about. But that's not what we're discussing today. We're discussing today, can former Adventists and Adventists remain friends? Now, we're a classic example of that. Logan's a former Adventist. Andrew is an Adventist pastor. And you can tell by our conversation even already, we're friends. And nothing's going to change that. We disagree, I'm sure, on quite a diverse range of beliefs and ideologies and thoughts. But we're kind of an example of people that can remain friends. And I think that will permeate this conversation. So I want to talk a little bit about this notion of shunning. And I've noticed in the last week or two, when I've been involved with some conversations on it in various groups, there's a lot of pushback from Adventists saying, hey, we don't shun, we don't do that. And look, some people might treat you badly, but not me. And they get very defensive about it. So I want to kind of remove that defensive nature of this. The reality is that when you leave the Adventist church, there is subtle shunning does go on. I've felt it, I've experienced it, but there are also incredible Adventists that maintain friendships as well. So I want to kind of view this conversation as more of a collective thing. We're not going to really be saying, oh, this person did this to me, even though I want to share a couple of experiences. The main thrust of the conversation is the Adventist Church as a body, as a movement, are they in any way reaching out to former Adventists in a pastoral care kind of way? Are they do they have empathy for the people who've left, or are they kind of good riddance, or oh, why are they so bitter? Is there a collective kind of mentality going on there? Let's talk about that. And also, is there an official policy that Adventists have to maybe reach out to former Adventists? Is there anything going on behind the scenes there? Because to me, it doesn't appear that there's an official kind of stance. Any kind of reaching out seems to be, how can we get them back, or how can we then, wash our hands of them? So I'll just kind of briefly share for 1 minute my little experience, and then Logan will go to you, and then Andrew will chat to you, just sort of talking a bit about what we've both about to say. So when I left, I noticed, I did it quite publicly. I wrote on Facebook, this is my last Sabbath as a Seventh-day Adventist. And over that weekend, over 1,500 comments were kind of put onto that wall, which blew my mind, because I really didn't think there would be that much interest in it. And I noticed immediately the variety of responses. So I didn't jump in and contribute. I just watched and read, and it was a long weekend of reading all these comments. And it really shocked me how many people quickly assumed the reason I'd left, and how every possible kind of reason was stated. And I thought, wow, so there's varied responses: anger, good on you, lots of different responses. On the Sunday, my dad came over, and I wasn't sure how he would respond. And he put his arms around me, said, "Son, you've done the right thing." And I thought, okay, well, that's good. Got family support. I don't think there's anyone in my family, the close immediate family, that were upset about it. And I got a message from one pastor who said, "Hey, look, I'm coming up right now, and I'm going to pray with you and pray you back into the church, brother." And I said, "It's cool. I'm happy to just marinate in this for a little while." And the other person who actually came to my house was Dr. Norm Young. And he literally turned up on the doorstep, and we sat outside in the sun there, and we had a great chat. And he's not well at the moment, but he and I would say, are actually good mates. We run into each other. We used to run into each other around town and have good conversations. Anyway, he was very supportive. I got the impression that, yeah, he was shocked I'd left and said, "Come back." But he was and continued being a friend ever since then. I've been very fortunate to have mainly all the friends that I haven't left. I've left, but I'm obviously still quite involved in the content. I don't go to an Adventist church. I don't believe 90% of Adventist doctrines. I'm not happy with some of their ethical or political stances, but I'm pretty fortunate. I think my personality is that, well, if you're not going to be my friend, well, what kind of friendship did we have in the first place? Anyway, that's me. Way too long talking. But I have heard lots of people share some pretty nasty stories where they've been treated badly. And I've noticed lately, the more I kind of push some of the theology and appear to be attacking the church, when really I'm just challenging and scrutinizing some of the belief claims, I've had a little bit of, oh, he's just bitter, or he's angry, or, he's got an axe to grind, and how come you're attacking the church when they funded you for so many years, and this kind of thing. And that, by the way, didn't happen. 90% of it was self-funded. But I have noticed Adventists are very good at the subtle ad hominem attack. It almost borders on a gossip kind of thing. Not everybody. So collectively, do Adventists do the subtle shunning game? And as a policy, do Adventists have anything at play to offer pastoral care that isn't just about trying to get them back in? Just checking up on them. How you doing? I've got empathy for you, that kind of thing. Logan, share your experience. I do want you to share if you've had some ad hominem attacks, if you've had people kind of walk away. Share a couple of stories, and then let's talk about some of the actual official stance the church may have.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. It's not easy to put it together sort of in one context, because I've had such a broad experience in sort of moving away from the church, say. So I have great friendships with people like Andrew. I have other friends who are, very committed Seventh-day Adventists, and we talk on the phone, we catch up, and we do things together as with the kids. My son is very good friends with another boy who is, a Seventh-day Adventist, goes to church every week, that sort of thing. So I have a broad range of experiences. I would say, obviously, the part of the problem is that you get involved in different things. And one of the things I thought of this morning that is a big element of Seventh-day Adventist friendships is that let's call them secular friends, say, I have to make a time to meet with those secular friends. But when I was a Seventh-day Adventist, it was almost like, do you want to hang out next Saturday? Yeah. And then, do you want to hang out next Saturday? You didn't have to say it, because you knew pretty much you had a predestined play date every week with your friends.
Yeah,
and so it was a given that you had that time together, which isn't exactly the same, I would say, in a secular friendship, because you don't have that set time every week to hang out, to catch up. How's the kids? How's the family? How's work, etc. So that's one of the things about the sort of the separation that I've felt, that because I didn't have a set time to see those Adventist friends, in a way, you sort of, the circle will get smaller because I'm not seeing them every week, So my Adventist friendships have decreased in that sense, partly because of the geography, partly of not seeing them all the time. And I wouldn't say that some of the ones that maybe haven't progressed were because I felt particularly, shunned by them or disapproved of or something. It was purely just a time frame geography type thing. Having said that, my experience is, if people are your friends, people like Andrew, the friendships, if they're real friends when you're an Adventist, my experience is they're real friends after you're an Adventist. That the intent is, I really like this guy. He's a great guy to be around. He's a fun guy to be around. I enjoy his conversation, whatever. And because that's how it was before, sort of when I was an Adventist, now that I'm not an Adventist, the same guy is still there as someone I like, someone I'm interested in. And I would say 90% of the friendship that I have with someone like Andrew doesn't involve our theological or ideological differences. It's, how's the family, how's the kids, hey, have you heard this new album? I'm listening to this, I'm listening to that. The vast range of what we talk about is all of those other things of life, and the new house build and this and that, and what's happening with your wife's job, and all the interesting things that we know impact on our lives day to day, and provide that the vast basis for our friendship is on those sorts of interpersonal things. It's very rare that we will wander into, what is the nature of a supernatural God or something, Okay, we do talk about these things, and we don't shy away from them. And I think that's probably that's one thing I want to highlight in this conversation, that the intent for me is is the main thing. I had a conversation about this with Paul Rebessa last week. He was over here. You know Paul very well, and Paul was over, and I had a bit of a precursor conversation with him to say, what do you think? You know, because obviously he works for the church and he's in the church. And I think we agreed that intent is a key element of this. So if my intention is to somehow have bad faith conversations with Andrew and, you know, think of some way of, oh, but you said this one time, and then what about this now? And, you know, if you're having these bad faith conversations, or somehow you just want to trip them up on what they said or something, the friendships are never going to last.
Yeah.
So Andrew could obviously do the same to me, and what about this and what about that, and but you used to think this, and does that really work? And that kind of friendship is not going to last. So I think if the intention is that I'm not here to trip you up, I'm not here to catch you out on something, and if he does the same to me, then we're both going to go forward in a really good normal friendship like most people do, you know. And I think that's one of the other things to reflect on, that my secular friendships are the same. You know, if I hang out with a bunch of guys who are you know, who are into cars or into music or things like that, we don't always wander into the territory of ideology. And I've got friends that are on a very different political spectrum to me, but we don't necessarily wander into that space, and we hang out and we catch up, we have a beer, we talk, we have a great time together. So I think if the intent is, I want to maintain this friendship, that is the first and foremost part of surviving an ex-Adventist / Adventist friendship. If the intent is there, I want this to work, I want this to survive, that to me is the key element. And that's where I think it becomes a little bit tricky. And I just want to answer your question there about the shunning. So it's difficult, because when I grew up in the church, there was always some element of, you know, be of the world, but not of the world. And so, you know, come out of her, my people type thing. And I think that included, in a way, friendships that I remember, you know, phrases, worldly people, you know, and worldly friendships. And I think that was somehow, my experience of hearing that was a sense of, well, do you really want to be spending time with those worldly people, or do you want to be spending time with the righteous, say, for want of a better word, you know? And I don't use that in a pejorative way of like, you know, those people are bad. I'm just saying there was maybe a sense of, if I'm going to spend time with people, am I going to spend time with worldly people or my people, you know, in the church, you know? And I think there was a sense of, well, the responsible Adventist perspective would be maybe not so much the worldly people, and maybe you just spending your time with, you know, people in the faith. And so I don't treat that as a sense of, I'm deliberately going to make sure that I cut ties with this friendship, although I'm pretty sure that's happened. I think it just was a perspective of, well, where am I going to put my time? Am I going to put my time with the worldly people or not? And I think that's where a real sense of, wow, I'm not good enough for you anymore might come from. And that's definitely I think that's definitely an issue.
Yeah. That's some really good thoughts there, Logan. And I like how you were talking about, we would all meet every Sabbath, or at college you'd see each other around the campus. And in the secular world, there isn't really a place like that. And even people say, oh, well, we've got, you know, cafe culture or pub culture or whatever, or go to the workers' club. But that's not as organized as a regular routine that Adventism has.
Absolutely.
The other point you made there I thought was interesting, where the friendships kind of last and percolate whether you are seeing each other regularly or not, if they're real friendships. And both of you are an example of that with regards to our friendship, I haven't seen you guys much at all in that from the early 90s to now. But we pick up where we left off whenever we catch up, or we'll see things on Facebook. And Andrew's still an Adventist and you're not. So even that's an example of friendships not routinely catching up, but surviving if the intention is there. Yes. And again, I think we're a living example of this kind of being able to work. And I like what you're saying about the perspective of the us and them kind of that does come from, should we keep in touch with worldly people? I remember when I left, a very good friend of mine in somewhere in California, he was at the division level. He was at the GC over there, and he when he saw my post, he wrote to me and said, "Oh, mate, I'm really going to miss you. All the best." And I wrote back and I said, "Dude, we've never met in the first place. We've only known each other online. I'm exactly the same person. We can message each other exactly the same way. I'm not dead." And he wrote back and he said, "Whoa, yeah, I can't believe I said that to you, that I was kind of farewelling you as a person." And so he and I, to this day, still keep in touch, and randomly, not routinely, and friends. So I did find a bit of that going on, and I did find a little bit if people felt awkward running into me at the Kurrumbong takeaway, I'd see them kind of just walk past a little bit, or cross the street even a couple of times. So I would just cross the street as well. I'll go back. And I remember one couple, they were sitting at a cafe in Morisset, and I just walked up and just sat at their same table and said, "How you guys going?" And they were super uncomfortable with that. And I said, "Look, I know you feel uncomfortable about this, but I haven't changed. You haven't changed. I've just made some decisions that you may disagree with, but I think we can still be friends." And by the end of the unplanned cafe catch-up, that they were fine. So maybe there's a bit of education that can happen there with Adventists, informers.
I think I something that I think about is that, well, when you say, I'm sure there are some people that, say when I left, it was like, you are dead to me, because they have never spoken to me since. It was almost like, that's it. Yeah. Never again, never speak to you again. And you are just gone. I mean, I think honestly, Peter, there's a myriad of reasons because of the way the church is, say, for example, in terms of nepotism. Let's just throw that into the mix there. So you're married into Adventist royalty, and your trajectory work-wise or whatever is on a good footing. Okay, you are somebody that can help other people move into very desirable positions and that sort of thing. Okay, now when you pull that rug from under them, it's like, what have you done? I had a trajectory happening here, and you've now just I'm no longer a conduit for your future. And so that's not necessarily maybe about the friendship. It's maybe not about, theology or religion. That is purely about, I thought I had a future happen. You were assisting me in this fantastic future, and now you're gone, and I'm not happy. And you are dead to me, mate. You have totally messed with this future that we sort of had pegged out. We hadn't secured it. Wasn't locked in, but we were going on a nice future. You were good. I was good. You had inroads to the families, the decision makers. You had and now you've just taken this away. So I think, friendship over. So I think there's a vast myriad of reasons why, and because, it's not always just about the theology and the rest of it. Sometimes it's about work, as Andrew knows, you're paying a mortgage on this stuff. It's not like you just go off to your other job like other people. If you're within the church in that sense of it's a job and everything else, I think if people leave and it affects that, then obviously you've got to take all that into consideration. So I think there's lots and lots of reasons why it's not just oh, well, now you're a worldly person or anything. I think there's a lot of things to take into consideration and think about in why maybe things break down afterwards and why it doesn't progress. But one other thing I wanted to say as well is that my perception early on was that a rejection of me rejecting, say, the theology or the faith or whatever was taken by some people as a rejection of them. And it took me a little bit to sort of say, no, I'm not really connected to you simply because of the faith. I'm connected to you because, we have this huge interest in, music or, I don't know, classic cars or whatever it is. And I had to sort of reiterate that you realize we can still be friends. And that was sort of a bit, I thought you just, I thought you just rejected the whole thing, all the theology, all the people, everything we are, you just written us completely off. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Now, some people do. Some people just can the lot. They can everyone they've ever met, the whole thing. Yeah. But I felt like I had to reassure quite a number of people that, no, you're still a friend. We can keep going forward in our friendship. This doesn't have to end now.
Yeah.
But it did mean that they had to, those who had to then have a certain element of respect for what I believe, the people who could cope with that was fine. There were others that were like, nah, I'm not even going to entertain that. So you're gone. You're gone. Yeah. You're gone because your ideas. I'm not going to discuss ideas with you because if you agree with me, we have a friendship. If you don't agree with me, and we have to I have to justify my faith or make sense of it to you in any way, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. That's too much pressure because when they go along each week, the assumption is that every person there thinks the same. They're not going to be challenged. They don't have to justify anything. It's just a given that, well, you think like I do. I'm comfortable in that. But once they hang out with me, it's like, ooh, don't ask me any questions. This is going to get too hard. So don't do that. Just better for me to just pretend that we never met. So
yeah, it's very nuanced and varied, and every individual has a different response. I've had people say that I betrayed them by leaving. So there's all sorts of like kind of passionate stuff going on and whatever stuff as well. I did find, and I think all three of us might have been at some point members in SDA Fight Club, Peter Veach's group. I don't know if you've been in there, Andrew, or not.
No, I wasn't brave enough.
Plus Stephen Wold used to be a pastor, and he started Xbox. I think that was one of the first ones that was former Adventists online that I remember coming across. And I was still an Adventist when I was in Steve Wold, great guy, great drummer,
good guy,
and had some great times with him. But he, another aspect, I had a lot of people actually really push back on me. I was in that group, so I was still an Adventist in the early days of being in that group, and people had a lot of assumptions. You're an Adventist, you must be thinking this, therefore we're going to push back on you like this. And I had some sleepless nights where I was being really attacked for being in the group, but still being an Adventist. And they immediately are defending the church. And there was a lot of angst towards any Adventist. But to be honest, that pushback really helped me. It really gave me a chance to explore my identity. And some of that pushback actually led to me going, I'm going to leave the church, because they were kind of making a bit of sense and a bit of logic was coming through, but they were very angry. Particularly one guy was very angry with me, and I couldn't believe it. And I thought he's assuming and assessing things I'm saying that aren't actually what I'm saying. But But what I'm saying there is all kinds of things go on, and in some ways we are all refining ourselves in some way to actually find out who we are, what we believe, why we believe it, can we defend it. And so I'm grateful for all, like the guy who said that I've betrayed him, the other guy that was attacking me on other things, the people who crossed the street, the people who've maintained friendships. All of it has helped create a stronger self-identity for me. So I'm grateful for that. Thanks for your thoughts there, Logan. We'll come back to you again in a minute. And I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. Just some general comments there on what we've been talking about and some of your thoughts that you can share with us.
Yeah, well, I guess I want to make a brief disclaimer because, I'm talking about my experience. We're going to talk to some degree about Logan and my experience in our friendship. And it's a positive story, I reckon. But I just know that it's not a lot of people's experience. And it's easy to say, oh, I had a good time, and other people feel really hurt because they had a terrible time.
Yeah.
So it's hard to generalize,
And those who have had the bad experiences, some of them, like I remember in Xbox and Fight Club, there's some really terrible things that have happened to them. So I agree with you. We're not trying to say that this conversation, this is how it should be. We get on really well, so all of you should get on well. It's nothing like that. I agree with you, and thanks for sharing that, Andrew, because it's important that everyone's experience is personal. We're all on a journey. We're having a discussion about it to just help that kind of journey progress in some way, a way out of pain, away from trauma, into a way we can have life more abundant. We all are on a journey to try and have a better life, I think. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Andrew.
Anyway. And I think, I can answer some of your other questions in due course about, what's the church's framework and what have you. But just on a personal level, I think one of the questions is, am I a fundamentalist or not? And I'm talking about, am I a religious fundamentalist or am I a secular fundamentalist? Because I use that term to say a fundamentalist basically says my current position is right and everybody else is wrong. And an extreme version of that is, my position is good and other positions are evil. And I just don't think in that framework, and I don't think Logan does either. And I don't think you do either, Peter. Because often people go, "Why are you having this guy on the show?" And you're like, "Well, I just like to hear from a variety of people, because there's sort of some tacit, approval or something. I think in people's minds, if you have certain people on the show that you're supporting them, and I know some of the people you think quite differently from.
No,
but you're just interested in
very true. Very true.
And so to me, this is a key issue, because my friends like Marcos Torres sort of tell me the debate's moved on a bit from this, but I still like to use the categories of modernism and postmodernism. The modernism goes, right, there's only one way that's to read something, is only one right answer, and we're just going to beat each other until someone is the victor, Whereas a postmodernist sort of says, well, there's different ways of interpreting text, there's different ways of interpreting life, evidence, and we're not all going to come to the same conclusion. And so, we've just got to show a bit of tolerance. Now, of course, you don't want to get so tolerant that you don't know what you think. It's good to have some convictions, obviously, but I think, to me, if you have that basic understanding of postmodernism, then you go, okay, if someone else comes up with a different conclusion to me, it might be disappointing, but I'm not necessarily going to pull out that you're wrong or you're evil framework. And that makes a huge difference. And the interesting thing to me is with things like SDA Fight Club and even guys like Steve Daly, whose research I find quite interesting. But to me, the guy is sort of a a fundamentalist in the case where he's going, if you still support Ellen White as some sort of legitimate figure, you've deceived. It's a fraud. You've lost it. You need to come to the light, come to Jesus, sort of thing. And I'm going, I don't know, because it's interesting. Even on your show, like you listen to a guy like Dennis Fortin, and you think, okay, yeah, he makes a lot of sense. He seems like a smart fella, and so there's more than one way of looking at these things. And so I think that's a really key thing for me, where you go, okay, if people shift in their view of life, in their view of religion, there's a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of relationships that get affected by that. But fundamentally, can I respect a different point of view?
Yeah, boy, that's such a good point. I'm really glad you've raised that. And in the close to 300 interviews I've done, I could pretty much categorize the people into those two different sides that you've just mentioned there. If you look back at CBs and Fordites and the post-glacier view, you'd lose your job if you lent saying you supported Ford. And I've noticed a really interesting thing, because I was a bit tongue-in-cheek when I did a response to something that Ted Wilson had done. Ted Wilson is a real Seventh-day Adventist, I said, and I had a lot of pushback from the more liberal progressive Adventists. I was being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but that didn't come across too well. But I've noticed since then that even with what I call the gospel Adventists, the more progressive ones, they are within their own kind of group have factions and little fights. I can see one going on at the moment between Tom Norris and Stephen Beagles, and I like both those guys, but they're pretty, they're getting to the point where they're almost blocking each other on Facebook. So I see these two groups. I want to come a little bit to this idea of the church. Do they have a responsibility to oversee these two groups? Because and I'm interested in Logan's thoughts on this too, after you've said your bit about it, Andrew. I feel like, this is me talking now, not you guys, but that in some ways Ted Wilson is trying to really define what he does see Adventism as, and he's kind of creating there's you guys and there's us over here, and we kind of don't want you guys involved. I see other divisions around the world, including the SPD, our division, not really wanting to get involved with that. They seem to play both sides. They seem to, in some ways support the Ted Wilson view, but want to be seen as cool and liberal and progressive. But I felt like that they have an opportunity to kind of referee these two sides that we're talking about. And you're right, Andrew, it's not as simple as you're a CB or a Fordite or a Gospel Adventist or a Heritage Adventist. There's so many subgroups in there. But the two that you pointed out, the two definitions, are very defined in many ways. And I just felt that the SPD, so I can only speak to my experience here, had opportunities to bring both sides together by saying, hey, look, we value all of you in our big tent of Adventism. But they tended to play it very quietly. So a vacuum has kind of happened, and in come the more fundamental independent Adventist, Heritage Adventists, and they kind of are having a bigger voice within Adventism, and they're also taking a lot of the money from the church as well. I mean, these independent guys are getting a lot of money coming in. So I'm wondering if the church did have a public policy of how they treated former Adventists and how they balanced the both sides of Adventists and made a sense of inclusion into policy, that it might make a kind of a healthier movement. So are there policies at play that kind of try and include both types of people in the church? And are there policies at play that aim to offer some kind of pastoral care to former Adventists? Or is it just left up to the individuals to respond however they feel called to respond? Andrew?
Let's take the second one first. Yeah, because this is something when you're a local church pastor, you always feel guilty about. When you look at pastoral care, there's sort of the ideal and the real, both even for the people that turn up every week, and it gets complicated. I'm pastor over a reasonably large Adventist church by Australian standards. We've got about 300 plus people. And so people sort of come and go, and you don't always offer the pastoral care you'd like to. And then, usually if people, like stop coming or resign, you make some sort of contact with them. But it just becomes, a matter of time. And so, this is why we try and promote small groups, and we try and promote, sort of coal-face friendships, really.
Yeah.
Because trying to do things at an organized level, it only works up to a certain amount of point, and then you just run out of time and energy.
Is there, though, a policy in the pastor's handbook that says if someone leaves the church, it'd be good if you could reach out to them? Like, so I know that there's the reality, like you say, and then there's the ideal, but is there an actual policy that you can then measure whether you've met the ideal or not?
Yeah, I was trying to find it. I thought it was actually in the church
Yeah, I just Googled it. Isn't there something in like the church manual type thing that talks about that?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there is.
This is the closest thing I could find. It's like, if people drop from membership, you must notify them in writing of the action taken with the assurance of enduring spiritual interest and personal concern, and it should be done where possible in person, So there is this sort of idea that, you should have some formal contact with people. And that's an initial thing. But then, beyond that, if people go, well, thanks, but, I ain't never coming back.
Yeah.
Some people still maintain, contact. Some churches do it formally, some do it informally, but it's just the realities of life. I think Graham Sharrock made a comment earlier on, when you posted the ad for today's thing, and he sort of went, well, and a lot of people misunderstood what he was saying, but I think it's what he was trying to say. There's only a certain number of relationships in your life.
Yeah.
And so, and it depends a little bit too, because, the cool thing about Logan's story is that he has maintained, a certain amount of contact with Adventist friends, and was comfortable to do that. Some people are like, oh no, I'm moving on totally. And it gets hard.
Yeah.
With regard to Graham's comment, my thought was, if you already got a friendship and they leave the church, you're not having to go to any extra effort to maintain that friendship. It's still the same friendship.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But different sorts of friendships. I mean, like you talked about, like we're sort of friends, but we haven't actually spoken to each other in a few years, probably.
Yeah.
There's those sort of friendships. But then there's other sort of friendships where you do, face-to-face stuff reasonably regularly.
But both of those aren't harder or less hard to maintain if one leaves the church or not, in both those cases, even though they're different.
Yeah,
you would hope that, but I'm not
but,
sure. I'm not sure that's in practice.
I just wasn't sure
that. There's a certain amount of time that with family life and church life, and then if you go, okay, well, I'm no longer seeing Logan at church anymore,
right?
So
it's an opportunity to have some energy reserved and saved.
Yeah, you got to be more intentional, I guess. That's the issue.
Yeah.
And it's hard because I guess in an ideal world, I mean, even people that you're not like close friends with, but you'd still try and offer some sort of ongoing pastoral concern. But in reality, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, I guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There have been some initiatives from time to time in the world church and here in Australia where they talk about, reconnecting with former members. And it is with the idea that, well, maybe some of them might want to come back,
Yeah.
So, which is fair enough, I guess. But it's interesting. Those initiatives don't seem to gain a lot of traction. And it just seems to be it's just a difficult thing to put into church life.
I wonder if they would gain traction if it was clear that they weren't trying to just get people back, that it wasn't some kind of
proselytizing effort.
Some kind of proselytizing or underscored sort of intention.
Well, the interesting thing is that there's been quite a strong movement within the evangelical church in general, including Adventism, just saying, hey, Christians, make more effort to build relationships with people outside of your church. And the idea is, that may lead to some sort of faith conversation, or it may not. It hopefully that's less, there's less underlying proselytation vibe in that sort of an approach. It's a bit more organic, but that is, something that sort of bubbles around, and a lot of missiologists and different people say, hey, why don't we do this better?
And I guess that's why we're having this chat is like, what kind of things can we all do better? Do things gain traction? I know when I left the church, the local community, the local secular community here treated me differently, and that surprised me. They were more almost, oh, phew, I don't have to treat him like he's some kind of Adventist priest, like that. Because Kurumbong's a big Adventist kind of town. It's still, even though it's not like it was back in its heyday, like when we were at college even. And so they kind of would treat me with a little bit nicer when I was an Adventist, but I'm not saying they treated me bad after. I quite enjoyed it because they were very themselves around me. And but they're more open with me of what they think about Adventists. And it's not just Adventists. They think about this with politicians and anyone that's claiming to have some kind of authority. It's kind of an Aussie kind of thing, isn't it? We kind of push back on authority a little bit. But one thing they do say is that every Adventist they meet, they think, what do you really want? And they don't think that with the local Uniting Church and the local Anglican Church and the local Baptist Church. They think that about Adventists. What do you guys really want? And I think that's a shame, isn't it? So Logan, jump in.
Can I jump in on that? A couple of things that I love Andrew's perspective, and I think he's right in how he sort of framed that. But one of the things if I take it out of my own personal experience, because yes, I do have Adventist friends, and I maintain that. However, I don't think I've ever had a phone call or sort of been invited to something by someone who said, "Oh, listen, we're having a social get together. Would you like to come along?" I often get asked if I want to go and play music or do something, contribute something, bring some sort of ability to something or a function within what they're doing. But I have this from friends like Andrew who said, "Oh, do you want to catch up for a burger?" And I think that there's a couple of things in this that if there just doesn't seem to be any sort of, we understand that you don't come on a Saturday anymore, but on a Sunday afternoon at 1:00, we're meeting at this park, and we'd love you to come along, whether you're ex-Adventist, you're part Adventist, whatever. Those sorts of independent place, neutral ground, social catch-ups to me aren't something that the church as an entity invests in. Now, personally, Andrew would ring me and say, "Hey, we're going here. Do you want to come along?" But no one else, like a good friend would, but not the church itself. And so that to me is a big issue, that there is no, even once a year, we have our ex-Adventists, "Do you want to come along?" sort of thing. And how neutral would that be is sort of part of my question. If, say, Andrew said, "Right, the big park here in Perth. We're going to get together. The kids can play, hang out. Now, there's going to be barbecues there. If you want to bring your own meat, you can cook your own meat. Now, if I want to have bacon and egg rolls, is that going to be okay? If I want to have a beer with my lunch, is that going to be okay? Is there going to be that, oh, this got really awkward because they're having a beer type thing? And so is it really neutral ground? Am I just getting up feeling like, why did I do this?
Yeah.
You know, I think these are really crucial issues, that if there is some sort of, you know what, we understand that we can have these catch-ups, social time, how much neutral ground can they be? I think that's a really, because I just haven't seen that since I left the church. I don't think I've had, probably I'd be lucky to have, well, none that I can think of where it's been, from a church perspective, are really neutral, because even sometimes when you go to something, if you're invited, there's no system, there doesn't seem to be necessarily an awareness of, oh, we're just going to pray now and you're going to join in this ritual. It's like, dude, that's not neutral ground. If you start enacting your rituals in this space, this is no longer
neutral.
Because one of my rituals might be, you know, I open 4 beers at the same time, smash them on the table and try and drink them. But I'm not going to do that.
No.
Because I realise that that's just not the place and time to be started. You know what I mean? Like a ritual-free zone whereby people just come together and have a social time. It happens, I find, at funerals, or maybe sometimes Adventist weddings, especially funerals. Afterwards, you have this big catch up and food and you talk and you chat and all the rest of it. And it's a great social time. It's almost like if you could have that without the funeral part.
Yes. But at the funeral part, there's a lot of preaching going on.
Well, that can happen, yes. But it's like the time afterwards. It's just this, hey, how you doing? Hey, I haven't seen you for ages. You know, where are you working now? And these really, I find you have these really good catch-ups.
Yeah.
Where there's just neutral ground, especially if it's not, say, at an Adventist church. It might be at a cemetery. And they have a tea and coffee time afterwards, and you have this huge catch-up. It's almost like, and people say, oh, we should do this again.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to catch up again. I'd love to catch up again. But the church doesn't facilitate anything like that, because I think the same issue you had where, and I've thought about this before, someone, you know, another Adventist sees Andrew sitting across from me, we're having a burger catch up, we've gone to a concert or something, and I'll be having a pint and a bacon burger, and they might think that somehow that Andrew is approving of this, or there's some,
exactly.
And I think that's part of the problem, that if a church has a catch up and it's supposed to be neutral ground and it's all like, yeah, you can have a beer if you want, you can have your bacon roll, whatever you feel like, that somehow they're
condoning it.
Are we condoning it?
Yeah.
Therein lies the issue of, what do you really want?
Yeah.
So what you really want is not to condone any of this. That's what you really want.
Yeah.
And people could maybe take that assumption of, we know what you really want now. You want to not condone this, and you want to let me know that this isn't approved of, or whatever. So I'm just saying that I see the challenges of doing something like this.
Yeah.
But I suppose give it a go, because I think there's one other issue that I really want to raise here, and that I think there's a massive issue around why people have left. Okay, now maybe some of the reason that I can maintain my strong friendships with Adventists is because I know why I left. If any of my friends, Adventist friends, say, why aren't you an Adventist? I can tell them straight away. I've got that clear in my head. I think there's a whole raft of Adventists that at a catch-up, so obviously the proselytizing type thing isn't going to be, there's no point doing that with me. And I wouldn't try and proselytize them back to my position. We just forget all that. But I think there's a lot of Adventists that if there was neutral ground catch-ups, they don't really know why they left. Maybe their parents left, or they just, you know, a marriage split up or whatever. And if they were asked along to something neutral ground, they probably would go and end up having conversations with people who say, so did you lose your faith? Say, no, not really. I was so embarrassed to go there anymore because she goes there and I can't. And they go, well, do you want to come along to our church, which is, neutral ground, different place? So I think the people that don't know why they left or didn't make a direct decision to do with the faith in leaving are the ones that would probably love to have this kind of no strings attached catch up, and maybe that's something that the individual churches can maybe think about. And who knows, even at a higher level, they could start talking about ways to do this, what sort of place you would pick, what is neutral ground, talking to pastors about, some little things you do, you may not see as ritual, but they are. Maybe could you just chill out a bit?
Yeah.
You don't need to put a hand on their shoulder and have a prayer with them at the end just to say, hey, good to see you again. You don't need to do that. That's not that doesn't have to be done. You can actually go, hey, nice to catch up, see you again, mate, and leave it at that.
Yeah.
So I think there is maybe a whole lot of work that can be done. One thing I will say is that Andrew's very good at doing this stuff instinctively. He can read the room. He understands this. So I don't think, he's someone that doesn't need this huge amount of training in this area, but some probably do. That's all.
Yeah. And also Andrew would then act on your Andrew natural tendencies. As you were talking there, Logan, I thought of locally Kylie and Brent and Stacey. I think it's a weekly thing that they run. It's food, and they use the local Uniting Church. It's at a neutral ground. Wow. They're Adventists, and it's fantastic. But it's not run by the Adventist Church. It's Adventists doing this independently. And I imagine that Andrew does a lot of this independently.
Yeah.
And I think what you're raising there, and I love it, because that's kind of really why I wanted this whole conversation to kind of turn to and focus on, is can the church in an official capacity run these neutral ground things? And so I'm keen now to hear Andrew's thoughts on that. Because you did touch on that a little bit, Andrew. Can you dig down a little bit more on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I know exactly what Logan's saying. There's still a lot of history, and people enjoy, reconnecting, even if they're walking a different path to what they used to. I think it's interesting that the church has a bit of a challenge in general about trying to run programs and then have room for relationships, and because of this, some people go, let's not run church services anymore. There are some new forms of church where it's just house groups, or they just get together in a park and have a bit of a pray and a chat, and that's even for the church members, because you do notice, if you have a church camp or even a one-day retreat or something, and you have more time, even with the church folk, to just talk to each other and share and listen and understand, it's a really good thing. Now, a healthy church, a certain amount will happen, before and after the programs, or maybe, if it's a Sabbath school, people have a bit of a chat, But I don't know. I think in church life in general, that's a big question about, because people want it. Once upon a time, they turn up. I love the old Adventists that turn up even if they hated the other members. They'd be like, we despise everyone else here, but we believe in this message, and we're just turning up to church because we want to hear a sermon, But that way of thinking is largely gone, like anyone just about under 60 now pretty much is like, I'm only going to turn up if I feel some sort of sense of connection and, value a relationship.
Particularly since lockdown in many ways. It kind of broke the spell for a while.
Yeah.
So, that's like, how does the church function? And then you go, okay, well, how do we, function with people who are, connected to us, but not in regular Adventism anymore? Yeah, it's a great question.
And I think what Logan's suggesting too isn't something that needs follow-up friendship or energy maintaining any of those connections. It's literally, hey guys, we're meeting in the park. Bring your beer, bring your burgers. We miss you guys. Let's catch up as friends. If they just had some sort of policy, the official church did that. There's no extra responsibility. But like Logan said, are they worried? And this is to you, Andrew. Are they worried that by allowing those who have left to come and just hang out and be themselves, are they in some way condoning some of, because Adventism is like, I'm not saying individuals, but as a church claims to be the remnant, where there's the world and there's us. And by becoming more secular and open and hanging out with the world, are they condoning something there? So while individuals like yourself, Kylie, Brenton, a heap of people are doing these things, that they would kind of go, look, we don't really want to throw our hand into that officially, because we could be seen as condoning the world and encouraging worldly friendships. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've spent most of my career working at local churches, and I've been very blessed because most of those local churches were reasonably tolerant and, somewhat progressive. And I think in that sort of environment, there's a reasonable amount of people that will go, oh yeah, we could cope with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did work in the conference office here for 3 years, and I did notice it does get a bit trickier. If I think at the end of the day, again, it comes back to the local thing. Like some people would go, oh yeah, let's do that. And others would be like, oh nah, I remember one of our churches here in Perth, at one point their pastor suggested, let's have a barbecue for the community at Christmas time. And some of the members at the time were like, oh, I don't know, we have to cook meat and I don't think it's a good thing, and they didn't want to do it. Yeah. Anyway, that church went through a bit of a journey, and some of those members left and others came, and now that church does do that, because now they feel more comfortable doing that sort of thing. So yeah, it's definitely something worth, promoting.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's up to that local group to find
their... comes down again more to local and independent, not a church policy. That I can't see a church policy doing, coming on board with that. Whereas what I do see
mentality too. Like, it's good to hear what Brenton and his wife are doing, because I do think, like, traditionally Adventism's been quite structured. So so the church board gets together and says, okay, what program are we going to run to blah, 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 but what you're sort of talking about ideally should be more organic, like certainly the conference or the local church can promote certain things, but if people just do it,
I guess I'm trying to tease apart how that notion is true. It's organic, but in my involvement with Salvation Army, Anglicans, Uniting Church, Baptists, I don't know if they have an official policy, but they certainly oversee this neutral ground kind of thing. There's heaps of things that all those churches I mentioned, they run weekly stuff where they have from playgroup. I know my daughters, this local, I think it's Church in the Trees, or it might be a different church over there in Morisset. They have play groups. They have all sorts of stuff that may not be officially in policy, but it's almost like it's so obviously what Jesus said to do, they don't even have to put it into policy. But as I've left the church, there's a bit of a different perspective I have, and I don't see Adventists doing that. And I see the community and the other denominations, not just the secular people, saying to me, why are Adventists kind of only ever talking to me if they want something? So I guess what Logan and I are suggesting, that if the church itself said, hey, look, let's just leave you guys to doing this organically, instead of doing that, said, hey, let's try and foster this, I wonder if it would be beneficial. And I wonder why they don't. And I guess like you're saying.
Well, I have seen, my own church doesn't do this, but there has been quite a movement in Australia in recent years, to do sort of ADRA stuff. There's a number of bulk shops, community gardens, this sort of thing. And that's really good. So that's one example. It's often, I must admit, it'd be interesting to talk to some of these other churches and figure out how they do it. Because my own church, when I arrived, was running 3 events for the community. One was a play group, one was a craft group for largely ladies, and the third one was like a seniors, outings friendship club. And it's interesting because over the course of the 6 years, only one of those is still going. And it wasn't because we didn't think it was a good thing, but you have sort of volunteers, like say with the play group, there's some amount of mums who have their own kids, they're not working or they're working part-time, and it gets to a point where their kids are in school now, they're going to go back to working more hours, so they go, we can't do it anymore, and then there's no one else who wants to. And so it does interest me that you say some of these other churches seem to have an ongoing culture of just running these events, which are good for the community, and there's something that people who former Adventists might want something like that, and they go, we don't want to be part of the church, but we'd be interested in being part of that. They're good things, but it doesn't always happen.
Can I say something in there?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, I think
thanks.
There is a little bit of a disconnect between sometimes Andrew and I with our experience of Adventism, because I know Andrew came through a very different road to me, because when I grew up an Adventist from, when I was born, basically, and was around a fairly conservative movement here in Western Australia. It was very conservative, and obviously, I followed your discussions around Des Ford quite interestingly, because Western Australia it imploded. Here.
Western Australia and Adelaide. South Australia, two big states.
That's right. And I remember I was a young boy, and I remember, going to people's places, and I'd hear the conversations, and oh man, this was enormous. And so I was around a very conservative Adventism in the early days, and very much that. I remember from the pulpit the conversations about whether to buy insurance or not, because literally Jesus is coming any day now, and this is the end times. Like, you're
showing a lack of faith if you buy insurance.
That's right, if you bought insurance. And I remember hearing this sort of stuff, and these were. So I think, to me, there has been such a focus historically in Adventism of we have a core driver here, and that is to let the world know, the 3 angels message, and as soon as this comes, then Jesus is here any day. And there's been such a clear understanding of the church's mission, whereas so many, the local Anglican church, etc., is sort of the gospel is didn't have that same driver. So the watering down of their goals, their purpose, all the rest of it was like, run a play group. Yeah, that's cool, because, we're sort of about doing community things anyway, and we have done for probably 150 years. So that's not going to be, that's not too far away from our core mission. Whereas when I was a little boy, and I learned, the JMV's message and that sort of thing, it was let people know the end is coming. This is the last days. We have one focus, and play groups are not part of that focus, and woodworking classes are not part of that focus whatsoever. It is about salvation right now. Jesus is coming back. The 3 angels message. Alan White, can predict the future and is telling us what's happening and all the rest of it. So my childhood growing up like that, there was no question what the church was for, and they had a set clear goal. Now, how that has changed, I do understand it's not so much like that, but if you have such a hangover legacy of such a clear focus, and like I said, every week it was crystal clear what this movement was for. And anything outside that was watering down the resources and the focus of what this church was about. So I do think when you look at some of the others like Salvation Army or whoever, that they've incorporated a much wider sense of what their purpose is, what their resources are for, all the rest of it. It's been a broader approach to applying all those resources and goals than the Adventist church has had. So I think that does play into a little bit of watering, why there's not this massive broad sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. But the interesting thing is, I've seen recent examples of where people do both. It's quite mind-blowing because I went to Zambia on a mission trip about 12 years ago. And what I noticed there, it's very cold-faced. Like Saturday afternoon, the ladies would put on their Dorcas T-shirts and take bags of clothes and go around the local villages and just sort of hand out clothes and help the needy, And I was like, wow. And yet they were still, doing the sort of, preaching about Jesus coming. And the other interesting thing that's happened recently in Papua New Guinea, we've had this mass movement where a church of 400,000 has gained an extra 300,000 members in 1 month, So it's been quite phenomenal. But again, it's interesting what's happened there because it's been largely based on small groups, relationships, and then people within their cultural context just doing local community service and just blessing the community, and people have appreciated it. And that was sort of the groundwork for anything else that happened. And so I'm sort of thinking, I think in Australian Adventism, we've sort of missed something because there's obviously other parts of the world where they can do both and not either or.
But the problem with for example, the PNG and the other places you're talking about, they need to put the T-shirt on with the Dorcas T-shirt, and the PNG thing was grassroots, but Mark Finlay scripted it every single church presentation that was going. It was a script from him. The PowerPoint was from the GC. Their intention of all these good works is to proselytize and bring people in. And I guess what Logan and I are saying is, can they benefit, and are they even capable of producing a neutral ground support? So I don't view the PNG model, not criticizing it. I've got good friends that, baptized people Steve Pete's baptized something like 80 people in one day. So I'm not criticizing. He's one of my best mates. You both know Steve as well.
Steve,
so it's not criticizing in the slightest, but as a collective, I think the collective notion was to win souls into the Adventist church, not just to help.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not doubting it. The only reason I take your point, but I'm going, even though there was that secondary motivation, I thought, well, here's examples of Adventists that can, do community stuff.
And you mentioned
you sort of scratch around in Australia, and typically, as Logan's been saying, the local Adventist church doesn't run a lot of stuff for the community. It's just we're just not very good at it.
Yeah. And like you mentioned ADRA earlier, like I interviewed Paul Rankin on the show not that few months ago, and he is doing incredible things with the ADRA op shop just locally here in Morisset. It is massive. I don't know if you guys, if you ever come over here,
I've heard about this.
Spend some time just going in there. I take my girls there. I've said to them, you should have a little coffee shop in the corner there as well. And I think they're thinking about it. But there's a book section, there's trinkets, they give away. It's absolutely incredible and expanding. So again, these aren't criticisms, but I want to address one thing, and I think Logan and I are probably just saying, thank goodness that Andrew wasn't marinated in that kind of Adventism that we were raised in, Logan.
Yeah. I figured you would be, yeah.
I want to make a statement here, and hopefully my Adventist friends don't take it the wrong way. But if I had, and the church hadn't changed, I probably would have left myself.
Well, that's something I was going to kind of say. But in people that I've interviewed, very, very few people are like Logan and me, multi-generational Adventists leaving the church. even talking to Norm Young, oh yeah, I came into the church when I was 16. Yeah, okay. And almost every single Adventist that's got a more open-minded progressive view or has left the church weren't actually born into it. And those who were born into it and marinated left, and they have a little bit of anger. And they have a bit of anger because they feel like they've been duped or sold a lie or had a carrot put in front of them saying things are changing. But that's another whole interview. I don't want to go down that path. But I do want to address something that Logan said there. I hope it comes back to me. It'll come back to me. But one thing I have noticed with this idea of watering down, that's what I wanted to say something about.
Yeah.
I have found with all other denominations, there is a watering down. Adventists can't do that. They have a watering down process, but because of the very solid heritage Adventist conservative fundamental teachings, it has a 30-year kind of loop, 20, 30 years, where let's water down the 28 fundamentals. Let's try and make it a little bit more gospel palatable, Jesus focused. There is always a pullback and a backlash to that watering down. I don't view Adventists as being so much on a pendulum. Sometimes they're more liberal, sometimes they're less liberal. They'll wear earrings or not wear earrings. They're standards, they're different things. Worship music styles, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a theology that runs through Adventism that can never gradually just become a little bit more soft. It is pulled back every 30, 40 years. You look to the beginning of Adventism right from the start. There's moments where it's about to become a little bit more open, snap back. About to come a little bit open, snap back. And one of the main reasons I left is I was noticing that loop. I'd studied that loop. I'd talked to people about that loop, and I realized it's never going to change. And so there's a false hope that people that are Adventists have if they stay because they think it's going to change. That snapback loop is never going to change, unfortunately. So people can live within it, but people like Logan and I who were marinated in it, my great-great-grandfather met Ellen White at a camp meeting up here in Queensland. Wow. That kind of marination makes it really almost painful to leave. And less so perhaps, and easier to navigate if you weren't born into it. But here's another thing I wanted to raise and hear some thoughts from both of you. And we're going to have a 5-minute break after that because there's so many questions and things coming up that I've purposely just been ignoring because I thought we'll have a break and then we'll just go to some comments and questions to wrap up.
Yep.
But this is something I have noticed, that there's kind of a mental health issue associated with taking on board Adventist belief and ideology too seriously. And Logan and I were kind of thrust into that, born into that. Every week, Jesus is coming back. The signs of the times. I think every sermon through the 60s and 70s and even into the early 80s was about this imminent return. Get ready. How do you get ready? You keep the Sabbath and all of this kind of legalistic stuff. When you leave the church, and I don't know if Logan experienced this, but even myself, who feels like I have a pretty good, healthy sense of identity and who I am, that's scuttled. And I honestly feel like the church has a responsibility to help people who have left the church in some way deal with that. Maybe they could put a YouTube clip saying, hey, if you do leave the church, some people have experienced mental health issues. We're sorry we may have caused that. Can we help in any way? I don't know. To me, I just know a lot of people have left the church. They've had a massive identity crisis, and many actually flounder quite badly with mental health. And I'd love to address that because I think that one of the great things that I've pursued and persisted in my own work path in the last 8 years is to try and get a real solid sense of self so that I can be a better father, better community member, enjoy friendships better. But I've seen a lot of people leave the church absolutely hurt, cut to pieces, and suffering a lot of anxiety, depression. So, Logan, let's have some thoughts on that. And then Andrew, I'll have some thoughts from you. And then we'll go to a break and then we'll have comments and questions.
Okay.
Logan first.
Yeah. It's not as easy. I mean, we're having a great chat here, and it's been, I suppose, fairly lighthearted or cerebral. But what you're talking about there is these are enormous issues. When I sort of had to break it to my mum that I was leaving theology and I couldn't do it anymore, and in a sense, that the leaving of Adventism after that, I mean, it was distressing. It was very, very distressing. It was, you're breaking people's hearts.
Yeah.
You really are. And it is, even just thinking about it now, it's like, you're just stabbing me in the heart here, mate.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to go there because I live with a mental illness, and I have I do have a mental illness that has taken me to hospitalizations and all sorts of things, and I've built my life back from that. Now, interestingly, there was an element of the psychotherapy that we talked about the church a lot. Partly, I mean, that wasn't necessarily and I have to make it clear, I'm not necessarily saying, that was put onto me by the church, but because of the kind of personality I had, and because of the basically the form of post-traumatic stress disorder that I have, it certainly didn't help, because I was very much, I can do this. And so when the church set these goals and this bar and that, I can do this. I can be that. Because I'll just do whatever it takes, and I used to, my final understanding of my mental health journey was that my problem's not climbing the mountain. My problem is knowing when to come back down. I will plant that flag with my last breath if I die. That was how I lived. So, of course, when the church sets this sort of, these are the goals, baby, watch me go.
Yeah.
I'm climbing that mountain and there's no coming back down. There is, I remember when I was really sick and I'm with the psychiatrist, I say, I don't do failure. You tell me what I need to do to get better, I will do this. I can do this. So, of course, that whole church element just, to the time it took me to shed that afterwards, and that sense of failure and all the rest of it, it destroyed me. And of course, the fact, I had so many friends. And then, of course, one of the things that I do want to mention is the shame. I've said all these things. I've baptized someone. I've been a part of this. I've told people this is life and death. And I've laid that out there. And the shame and the embarrassment, and I mean, thankfully, I had a loving family. I mean, my mum, as Andrew will attest, amazing human being who is able to sort of say, you know what, she just said, you come home, I accept you, no problem. There was no issue there. And she's been hugely supportive the whole time. So there's no issue in that sense. But wow, it was so difficult to leave the church. And I agree. I've seen people's mental health suffer enormously with a sense of identity, a sense of self-worth, how to make new friendships again. How does my life go forward? Where do I find these new ideas and all the rest of it? And I can attest to, from my experience, that it is, for a period, it is soul-destroying. It hurts. Yes. And nobody is there to talk you through it. That's right. My experience.
Yeah.
No one, apart from the great friends, personal friends like Andrew and my other friends here, Caleb, and other people that helped talk me through it. On any kind of level above that, there's nothing. There's no. Hey, we understand that this can be extremely, extremely life-changing and very dangerous to people's mental health. And I do believe that, because I've had the discussions, especially now that I'm open about my mental health journey and the mental illness that I've had. The people that have opened up to me about this, some people genuinely say, my mental health suffered because I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist. And it's very hard to discount that. I firmly believe that.
I agree with you, and I it's kind of the elephant in the room that I wish somehow the Adventist movement would acknowledge that nestled within the Adventist faith, nestled in there is a very dangerous belief, fostered and promoted in the Great Controversy, that you must at some point stand without an intercessor to prove Satan's claim that you can't keep the commandments wrong. It's between probation closing and the Lord's second coming. In the time of trouble, a people must be raised up to not sin. And sure, you can bring in your robe of righteousness. You can bring in your Holy Spirit helping you. You can bring in that Jesus is doing all the work, not you. You can coat that with as much positivity as you want, but nestled within Adventism is a tiny little gem of danger that is not a beautiful gem. It's filled with radiation, and it's there, and it's fostered, and people believe it and support it and promote it. And if you are the person that climbs to the top of the mountain and plants that flag, you are the kind of person that will stumble across that, and you will be the kind of person that thinks, I need to achieve that. And I promise you that little bit of radiation there in Adventism will damage your mental health.
It will burn you. It will burn you. Yeah.
And I feel that because the church as a body promotes the Great Controversy, where you can come into the Adventist church and never come across it because you've got a lovely local church, but there's a high chance that you will find it. There's a high chance you'll stumble across it, stumble into that pothole, and you are guaranteed to have some issues and mental health issues. And I therefore feel like if you're the Adventist church at official level and you're not removing that, you're not jettisoning that teaching in any way, that you therefore have a responsibility to people who have left the church and are struggling with mental health issues. There's something that you need to do. There's something perhaps that former Adventists need to do as well that maybe can help with that mental health, that pastoral care on the outside. Agnostics and atheists need to maybe get organised too.
Maybe there's a conversation for Andrew and I to be had in that space. Absolutely.
Yes.
Maybe so, because
brilliant.
That could be the piece of gold from today, Peter.
Yes.
That you may have just handed something to me there to have a really big think about. And I think the great thing is, at the core of this conversation is about friendship, and the friendship that I have with Andrew, and I know that we can talk about that stuff.
And I know there's people watching right now. There's people in Western Australia. There's people all around. There's a big audience in America who are fringe or have left the church. They've left the church in the last few months or the last couple of years, and they write to me all the time, and I know they're watching now, and they say, where can I go to have some kind of help with this stuff? You and Andrew together, imagine you have it. If that's the goal that comes from this, I'm so pleased that we've had this conversation.
Me too.
I can then say to people, because I'm not, you both know me, I'm a go with the flow, unorganized person, if this kind of technology didn't arrive where I can just have a conversation, go live, and it's up on the platforms, no more editing, off I go and have some cafe lunch with some local friends. That's how I live my life. Everything is about passive income. I don't know how to be organized. I don't know how to be 9 to 5. I can't organize groups like this. But what a great opportunity if someone watching said, I'm struggling with this, my mental health. Hey, I can put you on to an Adventist pastor and a former Adventist agnostic. They've got this little community they're building to address that. And you don't have to sit and spend hours counseling them, but you can have maybe a platform where they can get resources from or be directed places. Anyway, that's a something that I think would just be absolutely brilliant. It's something that's bugged me for the last 3.5 years, that I have not got a place to send formers who are battling to. Andrew, some thoughts there, and then we'll have a break, and then we're going to come back and just look at some of these comments and questions that have been coming through like crazy. Andrew, just quick some thoughts there. Thanks, Logan. That was great.
Well, I think, as an Adventist pastor, I should say, sorry to people who've been damaged by that sort of thinking in Adventism. I'm really sorry. And I want to acknowledge that. It's frustrating because it's not my experience, and I've spent 30 years of ministry running a different sort of Adventism that a lot of people have appreciated, and a number of people have sort of transitioned into a more healthy form of Christian faith, So I'm frustrated that it still hangs around. It'd be interesting because it's always interesting to think, like, who are the loudest voices and what's actually happening at the coalface. Because I know, Peter, I do acknowledge that, there's always certain voices that beat the drum on this sort of stuff. But I'm interested in the work of Ronald Lawson, the Adventist sociologist.
Yes.
Who I think you have interviewed.
Yeah, a couple of times.
Yeah, and he's supposedly putting his life work together, into these books, and I hope he publishes it.
Because Ron, if you're watching, this is a kick up.
I know, I keep saying, because he's getting old, mate. I'm like, Ron, do not die before it gets published.
Exactly.
Because the interesting thing that Ronald Lawson has done, he's interviewed something like 5,000 Adventists around the world. And he goes, now, what do you guys actually think? Because we assume people think stuff because the General Conference says this, or Doug Batchelor says that, or, this pops up. And he's come up with some very interesting things. What a survey he did way back in the 90s, the majority of Adventists he surveyed did not believe that Jesus' coming was imminent.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Even though at the time that was not too far away from the official position, which you guys have been reflecting on in your childhood.
I think that has shifted a lot lately. I've read some recent stats on that.
So that's sort of an interesting thing in itself. So, but nonetheless,
it's like,
there's been enough people that's been affected along the way that, it would be a good thing to try and go, hey, because there's a lot of anguish, I remember, Logan talking about his journey out of Adventism and out of Christian faith. And there was a lot of anguish, and there was anguish for his family. I felt anguish, even though I respected, because you feel like you're losing a sort of fellow colleague in the faith, and your relationship shifts. And even I find, even if you stay within the church, as you change your ideas, it's difficult, for you, it's difficult for the church. It's always hard. It's always a fight. It's always hard.
And no matter who the loudest voice is, even if it's Ted Wilson, Doug Batchelor, some really great, like we were talking about Denny 14 before, and some of Matt Cortman, these guys, no matter, even if some people have the voice, I find it fascinating that I can't get on the program, like having you on today, Andrew, as an ordained, currently employed pastor speaking about this stuff. It's like, pulling hen's teeth. It's to get, and I invite a lot, and I get lots of messages. I was going to come on the show, but the powers that be said I shouldn't, or I have some views that are my personal ones, but I can't share them because, so there's an authority going on. Whoever's got the loudest voice, the power that says don't speak up is winning. So I don't know how that can be addressed. And the difference with you and I would be is that when I thought that's never going to change, I left. Whereas you're seeing hope that it will change.
Yeah, in pockets, like Adventism is a very broad church. And if you're in some places, if you're some little country town where there's only one Adventist church and it's still operating like it's 1900, well, it's pretty tough, But in our cities now, you can find quite a variety. It was a very interesting experience for me. I went to the conference run by this AAF, the Forum Spectrum mob in 2007. And I was one of the more conservative people there in many ways.
Wow.
And that was a very interesting experience because I'm normally, considered a moderate or a liberal by some people. And it just goes to show. And yet most of these people were still practicing Adventists, but they had a very different perspective on a lot of issues. It was fascinating. And so, you can sort of hopefully find your tribe. And it's interesting, even at higher levels, like, the church has released a couple of significant books in the last 5 or 6 years on the whole issue of living without a mediator and God's people in the end time. And and these are top scholars at Andrews and what have you. Like, these are official Adventist voices who are going, mate, the old view is like not the go. And so, you sort of
struggle getting them on the show, though. And I'm not saying they have to be on my show.
Dennis Horton would be one of them, I think. But anyway,
he's brilliant.
Anyway.
I'm actually starting a new series, especially to try and address this, called SDAQ&A the lecture series, where I've had a few scholars say to me, we just feel like you're going to ask me some hard questions that I don't feel comfortable answering. So I'm going to, I'm starting next week, actually. We've got Milton Hook's going to be on, John Rosier is going to be on. I've got some others that I won't name just yet because they've got to be confirmed. But I'll get them on and they're going to deliver a lecture, basically. Not lecturing, but they're just going to share, here's my views. I'm not going to interrupt. It'll be hard for me, but I'm just going to not interrupt. It's like, welcome, intro, off you go. I'm going to do it with Matthew Cortman in a couple of weeks as well, in the hope of encouraging them to feel safe to come and share their views without me pushing back. So that's something to look forward to.
And one thing that I find encouraging, and I still understand why people like yourself, Peter, pull the ripcord, but the women's ordination issue has been fascinating because there's sections of the world church that are going to go, nah, we're not towing the party line. We're just not going to do it, know. And the trouble is, with our structure, when they do that, the only option is the nuclear option, where you have to basically expel them from the organisation. And Ted Wilson got tempted to do it, but he, at the end of the day, they went, no, we don't want to push the button.
Lockdown saved him because they didn't get to have that next annual council where he was about to press the button.
And there's a discussion coming up at the Australian Union Conference session on women's in ministry next year, So even in our division, there's significant discussions going on. And because I asked Gil Valentine a question last year when he did a presentation on his Ostriches and Canaries book.
Yeah, I was watching that yesterday. Funny.
Yeah, and I basically said to him, listen, Gil, looking, because he was studying what happened in the church in the 60s and 70s. And I said, listen, it's interesting. Some things have changed and other things we're still arguing about it 60 years later. And what's your take on that? And he said,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, he said to me, well, the interesting thing is, because of the internet, there's now forums for people to get together and share their ideas and say what they think. It's not just the official channels anymore. So there can be different forms of Adventism that have quite a presence, like some of the online Sabbath school things like the Avondale E14 one.
But they won't go public, though. You can't watch the messages. They're all still a little bit
Zoom
enclosed. Anyway, you can go along, but you can't watch it the week after.
So it's sort of interesting where you go, if we don't want more people to leave, we need to be a healthier Adventism. And even though the conservative wing of the church doesn't like it, it's just sort of busting out. It's just happening. Even at like union level, there's some places that are going, sorry, this is how we're doing stuff.
That union thing you mentioned, I can't wait to see what happens post that, because that could potentially change the landscape, and for good. But we'll see. We're gonna have a short break. Go and make yourselves a hot drink, and then we'll come back and we'll close with just looking at some of these questions and comments. I'm loving this conversation. Thank you so much, you two. It's just awesome. And it's important. I think it's really important. Okay, we'll be back very soon, everyone. If you've got questions you'd specifically like to ask, if you like Logan's idea, put some comments in right now, We will be back very soon.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, never be the same. Oh, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again.
Hello and welcome back to the second part of our conversation today, our landmark conversation, I think. I think it's a really important one to have, and I really appreciate my two guests, Logan Smith and Andrew Skeggs, for coming on the show today to have this conversation. People have asked me about my music, which is lovely. I appreciate that. And if you'd like to go and listen to the album that was just playing there in the break, you can scan that QR code, which looks like it's not working at the moment. There it is. And if you scan that, it'll take you to Spotify and you can listen for free. If you'd like to support my channel and what I'm doing, you can go over to this QR code and scan. And that really supports what I'm doing. Even if it's $1 or $2, I tell you what, it really helps. I'm doing 2 shows a week. And I think even though I would do it for free, I think it's an important program, if I say so myself, because we're creating a community that is trying to learn how to be civil, have discourse on divergent issues, and try and remain friends. Like what we're doing today is kind of what I hope the whole of SDA&A is. And to do that, I do need some support for the time that it takes to put in, so people can help by making donations there. or over at PayPal. I think that QR code actually takes people to paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music, even though I'm more podcasts than music nowadays. But the music is still there, and I still do about a gig a week, so that's not too slow, not too shabby. So we're going to go across to some of the. Let me get back to this where we were. Some of the comments and questions that have come through, and we'll just get either a nod or feedback from you guys if you'd want to reply. Some I'll just read as statements. So Damien Rice writes on Facebook, thanks, Peter. We always have something to learn from others if we enter with an open heart and mind. Gwen Wilkinson Slight writes, and by the way, if you're watching on Facebook group, I can't bring your comments up. You need to go to the SDA&A page, comment on there, and or watch on YouTube, and I can bring the comments up onto the screen. Otherwise, I'll just read them. So Gwen writes, this is dependent on who is in top administration, and we've had too much of some individuals lately. Nikki Carlton writes, it's reverse culture shock. The trauma in traditional church is huge, even if you stay in it. But if you leave, the trauma is very, very real. Remember, families of alcoholics have exactly the same dysfunction and trauma of traditional conservative religious families. This is spiritual abuse. Wow. It needs to be addressed. We also need healing in and out of the church. A great therapist is so important. As my recent live stream on Voice Life Fellowship, and by the way, Nikki does a regular weekly program on my group, Voice Life Fellowship. Nikki Carlton there every Friday night. Brilliant, open, authentic, honest sharing of her perspectives on the gospel, where she just recently did when she was where she says trauma is sin and sin is trauma under the new covenant. By the way, guys, step in anytime. I'm just kind of reading some of these. Feel free to speak up at any time. Some questions are directed to both of you. We'll come to those. Gwen adds, teaching that is a form of abuse. Yeah, wow. And Nikki mentions, without an intercessor, it is spiritual abuse. But then any other teaching besides the simple gospel, you are fully loved, is spiritually abusive. And I think Andrew was suggesting that there's pockets growing up or springing up around the place that certainly don't believe. And look, I've lived a lot of my life here, Avondale, Cooranbong. I was raised on the campus at Avondale. Yeah. Norm Young, my dad, Eric Magnuson was my neighbor, Dr. Lindsay. Des Ford was there for a period of time when I was there. I was raised as a progressive Adventist. I call it Avondaleism. And it was certainly different to the kind of Adventism that we're speaking of that affected us negatively that Logan was talking about. But I still had that somehow seep its way into my being and my mind, and it caused a lot of distress. But even then, I was offered these carrots of it's changing. You know, even then people were passing around the cassette tapes of Des Ford and of salvation. This is the late 70s, early 80s. And to be honest, over the near 300 interviews I've done with every kind of Adventist and former Adventist you can imagine, I think, the group, and I hate to say this, but the group I'm most upset with, annoyed with, is the progressive gospel Adventist, because you guys were my tribe. You guys were the hope, the assurance of salvation, but you also offered me false hope. And you also offered me these ways to be involved that were covert. If you have a gospel that's shining the love of Jesus, shout it from the rooftops, not from your little private groups on social media. I'd love to see a progressive Adventist, gospel Adventist community rise up and shine boldly, as the One Project once did. But how did that work out for them? There's another group called Real something. I can't remember the name of them. It just seems that as a system, as a movement, the church wants to suppress and push down the progressive. But for some reason, and Andrew might be able to help me on this one, they're optimistic. Like, oh, it's going to change. Look what's happening.
Well, it might be different if you're in North America, but, I don't know of any Adventist administrator in Australia that has said that One Project is a bad thing. Now, I might be misinformed.
No, you are correct. My point is, and I'm not saying my show is the arbiter of must see, must be on. It's not the guiding standard, but none of those guys would come on the show. I had one person in 2.5 years come on and say that they supported women's ordination. They'll come on and they'll say, oh, we love women in ministry. We support that. And what I don't like, this is why I'm disappointed with them. Behind the scenes, mate, we're really doing stuff to make happen. Yep. And there's nothing. They're doing nothing. They just talk about it, but they won't publicly stand against Ted Wilson.
Yeah, well, that's where next year's going to be interesting because, I see both sides of this story because on the one hand, as an administrator, you've got, left and right wing and you're trying to sort of keep it together, a bit like modern political parties, and a lot of them are coming apart at the seams and maybe the church will too, I don't know. But, so you're sort of trying to not offend the left or the right too much and steer a middle course. On the other hand, there's times when things have got to change. And that's why it is interesting because I didn't think our union would make a public stance on this. The fact they're even going to discuss it at a session, the women's ordination issue, I'm like, wow, someone's standing up. And it's interesting because, when you talk about the church is doing this, the church is doing that, the church is repressing this or promoting that, I'm always like, at what level? Say with the One Project, now it's disappointing that it, got the thumbs down at the GC level to some degree. But I'm going, well, our conference here was very happy to support it. Our presidents, our administrators, everyone's like, yep, let's do this. As far as I know, at a union and division level, I think they were like, yeah, that's fine. That's good. So I'm going, well, it wasn't repressed in my part of the world.
My experience is that they give you enough of it happening to keep you thinking it's going to change everything. But this is just my experience. I'm not saying you're wrong at all, but I've had this kind of conversation with Adventist apologists since 1979. Don't worry. We're doing stuff, mate, behind the scenes. This is really happening. And I'm just, and when I saw the no vote, and that's now 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago.
9 years ago, yeah.
I was constantly told, yeah, but there's no way it'll gain teeth. Compliance document, the Autumn Council. I don't know what it is, and maybe I need to look back at me because I had 25, 30 years of telling people it's going to change. Like Logan said, you feel a bit of shame. I was telling people, oh, look, focus on Jesus. It's changing. Stick in there, mow lawns, not reputations. And it was a hard pill for me to swallow to go, it's not going to change. And so I wonder at the optimism of those who feel it is going to change, whereas I think
how much change are you expecting, Peter? Because it's is the world church going to is everybody going to change? No.
Well, I think
the fact that we have, I think it's 4 or 5 unions around the world on that issue have said we are prepared, to face down the compliance committee process, and that we are changing. It's done.
Yeah.
And it's been that way for Well, they did it pretty much not long after. So till 2017, I think, around there,
like
some of those guys adopted it. So I'm going, well, some of these guys have been doing it for years, and it's
5
changed
years ago
in those areas.
But they've commit, like Norway, brilliant, those guys. I love these guys. That's what's hard for me. I love this. I love these guys. I love the Norwegian union saying, well, we're going to commission men as well then, and we're just not going to ordain anybody. I guess what I don't, so I see pockets always adapting and offering love and care and allowing women to be ministers at a commission level. Like I got a lot of pushback for speaking out against that photo of the union. Of course, I wasn't saying that there's only men, and I know there's women involved, but of those 23 jobs represented, only 10 were available to women to apply for. So that's what I'm talking about. So what I see what you're saying of, hey, let's go and support one project and a bit more contemporary music and worship. They're a standards thing, and they will shift and ebb and flow within the church. With other Protestant movements, I see this watering down, not in a bad way, but the ability to go, you know what? Some places we're going to allow this, some places we're not. And to be honest, there's a bit of a snap back against that too, even in the Protestant world.
Yeah.
And so when you realize something's not going to change at a theological level, where there's going to be this one little seed of drama planted within and nestled within Adventism that is never going to be jettisoned or watered down, that was what I thought they were telling me was going to change. I thought that it was going to be a lessening of Ellen White's authority is what's going to be shifted to the back of the bus, not the standards. But it turns out all the youth leaders and all that, what they were telling me is, women are going to be more accepted and you'll be able to play a bit more contemporary music and this kind of thing. Yeah, okay. But, if you think the church is going to soften its view on Ellen White as a collective, it's just not going to happen. And that's okay. Once you realize that, you can then work within it in a health. And I think that's what you've done, Andrew. You've realized this is what it is. So I'm going to work within it the way I can. And I respect that because you've had a thought process, you've come to some conclusions, and you're moving forward in a positive way. I don't like the false hope of people telling me that that's going to change, because that is never going to change. Ellen White is marinated to the DNA core of Adventism, and her theology of last generation theology, or the last generation theologists, Ellen White she's the one that fostered that whole, belief system of last generation theology. That kind of stuff is never going to change. And that's the stuff I wish would change, because that's the stuff that affects your mental health.
Yeah.
Well, my only argument would be, like, it might not officially change at the top, and there'll always be that. But I'm going, if you went back 50 years ago and did a study of 100 SDA churches and said, how hardcore are they on last generation theology? And you did the same thing today, there'd be a significant shift in the data.
I think last generation theology is more firmly entrenched than it ever was.
Wow.
That's in my experience of interviewing these wide variety of people. I don't think I almost see, 45 years ago, Neil Wilson, Ted Wilson, identical. Like, I don't see any change in Adventism in the last 45 years.
I just don't like my experience at the local church. I mean, and part of it is younger people just don't read as many books. That's just like they're not reading Ellen White, let alone anything else. They're just scrolling stuff.
And they know nothing about the investigative judgment, what that even means.
So
is ignorance a good excuse or a good way to say, well, therefore we don't need to change it?
If you went to your average Adventist in the pew here in Perth, Western Australia, and said, what do you know about last generation theology? I mean, there'd be a certain percentage that'd fire up. The rest would be like, what the heck are you talking about?
Oh, yeah, totally. But you are very likely, if you hang around in that church or within Adventism, and to stumble across that stuff. And if you're the kind of person that climbs the mountain, plants your flags, you're even more likely to stumble across it and find your way to it and then be adversely affected.
And there has to be an answer. That's the thing. That's why, if I just go back on what you were saying, Peter, this is exactly why it unraveled for me. Exactly this issue, because I was at college at a time where it's a bit like you were saying, where it's going to change. It was all very hush hush, and it got to the point where literally, as long as you don't ask the questions, we all know, wink wink, that okay, we have to do an assignment on, like you say, the investigative judgment. You got to do the assignments, okay, and you got to hand them in. You got to write the right thing, but if you never mention it in the rest of your pastoral career, fine by us. And I sort of was, I was in the classroom when a few people were asking the question, and the lecturer is refusing to answer, just ignoring the question. And I got so annoyed and so angry. I said, how do you expect us to go out there and do the job when you won't even answer these questions? I said, I just can't do this. And the class finished, we left, and I went and spoke to a couple of days. It was only probably the next couple of days that I went and spoke to a lecturer. I shut the door, I sat down, I said, I need to know. Then what is the answer to these questions about, because we were studying Revelation at the time, and that guy, to his credit, he did answer me, and he probably had enough trust to know that I wouldn't, expose this person and go and say, oh, this lecturer told me this or told me that. And I never have. I think Andrew knows who I spoke to, but he did at least answer my question straight up.
Still behind closed doors, though.
Yeah, that's right. And I wasn't going to push him for that. And he basically said, you do with that what you will. And I realized then that it had to be 100%. I knew straight away that, yes, it was not going to change, but also that if I wanted to stay in it, I suppose that there's two things, and there is a little devil's advocate I'd like to play on this, that if I truly, truly believe sort of the concept of a supernatural God that does intervene in human history, in our day to day, then at some point I have to have the faith to say, well, he's directing this. If there's no change, Peter, it's no change for a reason, and that reason is an omnipotent God that is somewhere in the heart of this, ensuring the best path. At what point do I say? And I think this is a fair question.
The Adventist, you mean?
It's a fair question, I think, to say, well,
if you're an Adventist,
but
is God also directing that to the local Baptist as well, which is saying something totally different?
Well, you can't. I suppose you can't believe that, and I say that genuinely, to Andrew as well. That at some point, I think the people, the members, must have some element of faith that says, I have to believe that this is directed by something so much greater. Does that ever play into your thoughts, Peter, of it's not changing because the greatest good from the greatest God is directing that? He's deciding that, or they are deciding that.
I'm probably more, perhaps a little bit like you, where I would say it's just natural human behavior that will never change.
Yes.
I often sit there and think, like, I'm not, like some people say I'm trying to attack. I'm really not. I'm not saying that Andrew should be any different or you should be any different than you are. But I love, challenging and asking, well, why do you believe it? Can you defend it? Not to be in any way trying to manipulate or control someone's path or journey. It's just how I'm wired.
But
and I also think that if you challenge yourself and you think, and why do I believe that? Why don't I believe that? It refines you in some way. And can lead to better friendships as well.
No, I agree. I often look at the Adventist Church as an outsider. In a sense, I'm listening to you two talk, and I don't have a dog in this fight because it's not. That's not how I see the world. But when I do look from the outside and remember sort of being in, I often do ask, what place does faith play in these situations? Is there a place of saying, well, at some point I have to believe that, this supernatural God is somehow intervening?
If you're going to take on that template of belief.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And the only response I can give is, the Martin Luther King one, where he says the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So he was basically saying it's an agonizingly slow process at times. But,
I like that,
it's
actually.
interesting. I mean, even if you look at that whole issue, with Black Lives Matter, because, people are saying, hey, we've still got an issue with racism. And you go, yeah, we do. But is it better than in Martin Luther King's day? Well, it probably is, one would hope, So you sort of...
And there's a danger.
Project.
Okay. Yeah, and the danger, which I'm glad you've said that, Andrew, because there's a danger for people to think I'm trying to deconstruct Adventism and just tear it down. No, I'm just trying to say, and people can then say to me, like you said, well, it's not as bad as it was back then. A part of something that motivates me is this idea of authenticity, and there seems to be a culture of disingenuous leadership and even moral and ethical behavior that's kind of marinated within Adventism. Logan's talking about, this guy was honest to him behind the scenes.
That is the whole, Peter, that is the whole issue for me. And I'm pleased you say it, because I was going to say it before. My whole issue and the conversation I had with my mum, particularly when I said to her, I can't do this anymore. What I was saying was, I have to have it clear in my head. I can't say one thing and believe another. That is not who I am. I am authenticity, integrity was the absolute key of me when I was a Seventh-day Adventist. If someone pinned me to it, do you actually stand for this? And I was at that point, yes, I do. The integrity matters to me. The authenticity matters to me. And when I realized that was never going to work, that's why I'm not a Seventh-day Adventist in that sense, because the integrity, I'll be 100%, clear here. The integrity for me was not there. It just wasn't. And now if it's different for other people, that's fine for them. And I'm not judging those people. I'm just saying, for me, the integrity was not there, because when I pushed, it just crumbled into nowhere. And then when I pushed even more, it was like you say, behind closed doors, we can have some of this. But I knew that when I went out there to country churches, because obviously you've got to remember, when you're a student, you're sent out to preach at country churches, and that when people corner you, I'm not the kind of person that will say, oh yes, brother, this or that. I'm just not that person at all. And that's why it could not work for me. So I appreciate you saying that. I think at the heart of it, there is an issue of integrity.
And I certainly respect what you guys are saying. It's a challenge. I think the drama is that Paul says two different things, and there's a tension between what he says. Like, on the one hand, in Galatians, he's going, he just rips into these, Jewish Christians, says, nah, this is wrong. It's another gospel, legalism. It's gone. I refuse to agree with you. So there's times where you got to stand up and say, On the other hand, in Romans 14 and 15, he talks about the stronger and weaker brother. And he basically says there's times when, if you're a more liberal Christian, you've got to bite your tongue and for the sake of the conservative Christian's conscience, and trying to keep those two together is a real tension. Certainly as a pastor, let me tell you.
Yeah, I agree. And you're so right, Andrew. And it's a little bit different for you, because you are so good at that. That is ingrained into the kind of person you are. And that's why this conversation is happening today, because our friendship can survive because of you are that kind of person. I think once we take it away from, say, for example, you as an individual, and I think Peter and I are looking at a purely theological level or a doctrine level. This is the doctrine. What you can do personally is take that biblical view and you can nail it perfectly. But what Peter and I probably are at is this, on that doctrine level and stuff, how does that fly then? If we take it away from that, how does that fly now? How does that actually work in the details? Is that sort of a fair comment, Pete?
Great. Yeah, that's great. And that's why I'm hoping this is conveying that it's not a judgment of Andrew or others that decide to stay. It's very much a personal decision. And I don't see Andrew as someone. Sorry, we're talking about you, Andrew. Are you right here?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Andrew, to me, it doesn't have cognitive dissonance. He's not trying to keep two beliefs going simultaneously. He has he's holding two ideas in tension, but they're not beliefs that are messing with his cognitive capabilities. And I think it's great that people can draw those conclusions. For me, about this disingenuous thing, the random older dad. Here I am, 50 when Renee was born, and here she is when she was 2, and the no vote's going. She's 11 now. I couldn't be disingenuous to them. So this, in many ways, SDA&A is my platform of finding my way to my authentic self. And I'm still a work in progress, always will be, hugely flawed individual. But I find that I can have conversations with both my daughters now, 10 and 11, and I am the true me to them, probably more than anybody, and Barb, of course, as well. But I just could not have them ask me questions and me somehow say, hey, well, I don't really believe this, but don't tell anyone at school. Or, hey, I don't want to. I've spoken to lots of scholars and academics that were there at the Ford issue. They were being, they had Athol Tolhurst, they had Keith Parmenter drilling them. Are you a Fordite? We're a bit worried. And they tell me how cleverly they were able to kind of maneuver their way to stay in the church and be a minister. But I said this to them, but they thought I was meaning that. There was almost a culture of, hey, we tricked the heavies, the big guys, and we stayed in the church because we can bring about some good. We're here to shine that light. Good on them.
But they probably did, but it's a sad state of affairs,
Exactly,
hopefully, I think times have moved on in some ways, not in others, But I hear what you're saying. It would have been. Well, and again, we tend to look at history through our modern frame, but those were difficult times.
Yeah,
exactly.
Were.
And again, even though I'm kind of doing that
difficult times.
Even though I'm doing it in a mocking kind of way,
yeah.
I was one of those people. I'm mocking myself in some ways, and I have no judgment. Some of the most interesting people to listen to. That's why I want to do this lecture series that will just be ongoing. Is the Adventist scholar academic, to me, is one of the most interesting people to listen to. The Adventist historian, I'm just like that interview I did with Denny 14 about his book on Butler. Like, I was a pig in mud. I couldn't sleep the night before because I just couldn't wait. Apparently Gil Valentine's going to come on later. And I just find it's a bit sad that they have to come on with that sense of, don't ask me any challenging questions. And I'm okay with that because I find them so fascinating. Adventism is, like some people have said, why are you doing this? If you've been involved with it, it is one of the most interesting movements on the planet. It is so fascinating to analyze and discuss. Okay, back to some more, and we'll wrap it up soon. Nikki has said, I could do a live stream on how to recover from religion. This is when we were talking about Logan saying, hey, if there's one bit of gold that's come from today. Loanne Smith, thanks for this, Logan and Andrew. Gillian has written, Gillian Ford has written, Andrew has a whole new additional job he didn't ask for. If you take on board that opportunity that Logan might place towards you there. Derek McCutcheon, great guy. He's in Western Australia too, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. So he's writing, "Well done, gents. There's the gold." He's talking about that.
Interesting.
That moment. People are
Nice.
responding well to that. It's one thing to recognize the church is struggling in this area, but we need people like the Logans of this world who understand what is needed to help us speak into it and help us grow and do better. Without this authentic and genuine work, we will continue to flounder. Derek, by the way, you've been invited on the show. Come on board. Gwen Wilkinson Slide has written, "It's loud voices of a minority that makes last generation theology seem so strong now." I think I agree. I think I would add, though, that I'm often surprised why Adventists are like, shock. How on earth could Adventism have come to this strange last generation theology? How could they do that? I'm shocked that people think that. It is, I love the word marinated. It is marinated in Ellen G. White's writings. She talks about, the only disclaimer to her food for worms vision not coming true is that she said, well, people weren't keeping the third angel's gospel as they should have been. And if they had have been, Jesus would have come back in that time. That's LGT in a nutshell. So, yeah, I agree with you, Gwen. It's a small minority perhaps, but it's growing and it's gaining... It has top leadership, President of the World Church endorsement. That's concerning. Brendan Paul Valiant has asked of Pastor Skeggs, if the conference president issued a total attendance ban. This is slightly off topic, but it's about friendships and maintaining some kind of cohesive connection. If the conference president issued a total attendance ban, any church-owned property or church-run event against someone disfellowshipped for a personality clash with their pastor, would you obey it within your local church? Asking for a friend. Andrew.
Yeah, well, I think you got to take those things on a case-by-case basis. It sounds like a sad story, and it's something you want to avoid. But one thing is, I shouldn't turn up at the local mosque every week saying, this is why I'm so annoyed with you guys and why I disagree with you so much.
Yeah.
Like if there's some sort of conflict, and like at some point you got to either reconcile or
exactly.
do something different.
Yeah, that's true. And if you're looking into SDA Q&A and don't realize that often the people that have these conversations are going back to their life living without this kind of robust nature. Like I'm not living my whole life in tension with these conversations. Our Voice Life Fellowship group, we never discuss this stuff. And you're right. If you've got to pick your community that you're speaking this stuff about, SDA Q&A is a platform for robust conversations on divergent views. Voice Life Fellowship, if someone in there kept going, oh, you guys are doing this wrong, or that's terrible, or we hate what you're doing here, I'd boot them out, So, I hear what you're saying. James Andres from California. How are you, James? My former Adventist Fellowship mini documentary is nearly finished. Hopefully next week it'll be aired here on the show. James funded my whole trip in February to visit the former Adventist Fellowship. And greetings from California. Oh, a compliment. I didn't realize that. I wouldn't have brought it up. But thank you.
I was going to say,
thank you. I appreciate that. A bit of a compliment to me. Thank you. Motor Sapien. Hi, everyone. And Brendan is laughing. I'm shunned institutionally after disfellowship, worse than if I left the Jehovah's Witnesses. And yeah, Brendan's definitely does have a sad and interesting story. Motor Sapien, I'm catching up, but back in the early 90s at Loma Linda would also be the end of Graham Maxwell and Jack Pravancha's careers. Interesting.
Yeah, we're talking about that amazing period.
Yeah.
Flowering of ideas.
I'm kicking myself now because I literally, not that I would have used it, but I'd be here. I'd have an MA. I could be pushing into a PhD on Glacier View. Just 3 months. But back then, 3 months seemed like a long time.
What was her name?
What's that?
What was her name?
You know me well.
Had to be done.
There were interests at the time that led him elsewhere. I know of what you speak.
Yes.
Oh dear. There's a whole.
Luckily, he made it out alive. He's happily married man.
So look at that there. Friendship. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's the long trajectory too that we were speaking of earlier. That eventually,
that's right.
Eventually,
that's right.
You know, I'm the happiest I've ever been, and I
love it.
Go to sleep happy every night, and
great.
But there's been some reasons.
I don't know how to put it in the comments. I just sent you on Messenger.
Oh, I can bring that
up. A podcast. Yeah, because Marcos Torres, who's an Adventist pastor, he was working here in Perth. He's doing some independent stuff now.
Oh,
he has this thing called Sacred Scars. It's a podcast on recovering from religious trauma. I haven't listened to it yet, but most of what Marcos does is pretty good.
Yeah.
So wherever this conversation goes we've had today, that's a resource that I think will be worth checking out.
I'll bring that up. What is your religious trauma type?
Podcast.
Yeah, he's just got some episodes.
And he's a Seventh-day Adventist, is he?
Yeah, he's an Adventist pastor. But he's recently pulled out of employment and he's doing his own sort of ministry.
Is he the one involved with that Real Love or Love Reality or Reality something?
I don't know, he's got his finger in a few pies, but anyway.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, this looks really interesting.
That. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew.
We've got
Laurie. He's a psychologist, so I think he's trying to, marry church experience because he himself came from a very hardcore old school Adventist background and has had to sort of detox.
Do you have any contact at all? No, do you know him? Like, could you ask on my behalf if he'd come on the show? I'd love to chat with him.
Yeah, sure.
If he is the Love Reality guy, I have already contacted him and they've agreed to come on the show. So hopefully, So here's Laurie White. She has written. Oh, John Rosie is watching. He must be up early in the UK. We'll read out his comment in a moment too. And John will be on next week, possibly kicking off my lecture series. Laurie White writes, can a current practicing Adventist have compassion and offer pastoral or religious spiritual care towards someone who has decided their faith or the faith of the SDA Church is no longer acceptable? What do you think? I think they can.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's what we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
And honestly, these are comments from probably an hour ago.
Yeah.
I saw them earlier.
Some are current and some are not.
Yeah.
Let's read what John has said.
No, the Love Reality guy is a different guy than Mark.
Different guy. Love Reality, that's it. They're coming on the show. So, your guy, if you can ask on my behalf, would be great. And Logan might like to chat to him too.
Yeah, that sounds really. Where is he? Do you know where he is, Andrew?
Well, he's moving back to the US, but he has been based. He's an American guy. He's been working in Perth for about 10 years.
Wow.
I'm not sure when he's moving. Yeah.
Oh, I do know this guy. Yes.
Yeah, he does a lot of online stuff.
Yeah. Actually, John's comment is more about women's ordination. I'm going to get him to talk about that a bit next week. And Gwen has replied, top administration, allow it. And in fact, push it. This is the last generation theology. And Gillian has written, putting it straight, the issues Des raised have been known about for many decades. The best scholars at Glacier View knew he was right about what the problems were. They supported Wilson by not saying anything and then complaining afterwards. Since then, nothing has really been done about the IJ. When we came back to Australia and Des was travelling, he came home amazed because ministers were saying they didn't believe in the IJ, but still nobody can speak about it except to redefine a more friendly version that isn't biblical either. You ministers talk to each other and imagine things are improving when they are not. This reveals a massive level of deceit. Wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, I respectfully disagree, but I have a small sample. I've worked in West Australia my whole life. I know a lot of Adventists here. Yeah, but
I think collectively,
yeah,
I don't think she's calling out you or others as being that,
yeah,
or individual pockets. I'd agree with her that as a collective bunch, it's never had been addressed since the Glacier View, effectively. Certainly not with
yeah. Well, there's two levels, that Gillian talks about. Like, one is the prophetic interpretation. The other one is the whole issue of salvation, how you understand, righteousness by faith, and the two are interrelated, obviously. Yeah. It's as I say, it's always interesting to go, well, how do you define Adventism? It's easy to say, well, Ted Wilson says this, Ted Wilson says that. I'm more of a fan of the coalface, but that's my bias.
Yeah. Well, the coalface is great for individuals and local church ministry. I guess we're trying to talk about the collective stance, and I can't find anywhere where the church officially has said, look, yeah, like even that recent Record article where they were still promoting this false notion that the majority of the Glacier View leaders couldn't find light. Ironically, that rumor was started by Bill Johnson and then he quelled it, 40 years later on my show by saying, no, actually the majority came to consensus and agreed with Des, and Des could vote on it, was happy to go along with it. To me, that's that kind of admission from the top needs to happen. The church needs to go, yeah, sorry, for 40 years we were saying that the majority didn't agree with Des at Glacier View. Actually, we're wrong, and we've promoted that notion. The majority did agree with Des that they could actually proceed. It's that kind of skullduggery and behind-the-scenes movements that at a grassroots level, yeah, you don't have to even face it, and you can do great things with Adventism. But the church at some level needs to have some kind of accountability. They just don't seem to be ethical with that kind of thing that Gillian's talking about. And she just highlights, she's not talking about you.
Yeah.
She loves you.
Yeah.
Her and I have met.
Even though we don't agree on everything, but we are good mates, which is great.
Yeah. Oh, Gillian and I this morning were disagreeing on things, and the great thing is we don't have to agree. We still love each other.
Yeah.
John writes, the last generation theology and the idea of eschatological perfection comes from Methodism. Adventism inherited it from its connection to Methodism. Ellen White was marinated in Methodism. Thank you, John. I love when a smart person says
I totally agree.
That's a good clarification. That's right.
And I do not believe she ever spiritually or psychologically left Methodism.
Wow.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, and some scholars have done some work on this, because if you read Steps to Christ, it's almost a sort of, Calvin Luther sort of version of salvation. Then you read other parts, and it's very Wesleyan, very Methodist, and so it really depends, what she's talking about, what emphasis she's giving. The trouble is, I think, we sort of expect Ellen White to be this perfectly precise theologian that always gets it right. I think she's almost like she's almost like a pinch hitting person who just sort of, she sees the situation and she fires something off, and then there's a different situation, she fires something else off, and you sort of go, now hang on. If you sat it out and put the two things together, there's a bit of contradiction in some ways. And she would go, I was just trying to address something,
I'd accept that if she was just a C.S. Lewis or even a Wesley or a Calvin. But if God's given her a special message to be the lesser light, pointing to the greater light, it's Adventism theologically, because of her, is one big ball of confusion. I'd rather just go, if that's going to be my path to God, to Christ, to Jesus, I'd just go, here's that ball of confusion. great, there we go. You go and read, the Gospels. It's not rocket science. It's not confusing. There's challenges and there's conversation, but there's so much consensus that makes the part. I just think Adventism as a theology, not as a movement or a culture, as a theology, is absolutely irrelevant to one's pathway to understanding the gospel. It actually hinders the process.
Well, it depends who you're talking to.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm just going to leave that
because
right there.
Ironically, of course, one of the biggest fans of the gospel and a big fan of Ellen White was Desmond Ford, and yet he if you looked at how he used Ellen White, he was like, okay, we'll take the gold, the other stuff we'll put aside. Now, not
how did that work out? How did that work out for him?
Yeah,
wasn't his whole realm hindered post Glacier View? He had to go and do his own total separate thing.
But ironically, until he ended up, going in a different direction prophetically. Like, he was getting a lot of criticism, but he was winning a lot of fans. Like, up until October 79, he had massive audiences wanting to hear his stuff on the gospel and righteousness by faith. He had a lot of opponents, but man, people were drinking it in.
Oh yeah.
So I don't think, you know what I mean. Just because you go, because he went against Ellen White on prophetic stuff, and that ended sadly, doesn't mean that he wasn't an Ellen White fan and he was a gospel preacher. He was.
My term was hindered. I can't see where Adventism helped that cause of his. He was able to find and say, look here, guys, and if we peer through here and let's put that down over here, and behind that you can see this. But how many people truly grasped that and were able to flow unhindered to the gospel? I think the majority of people that find the gospel via Adventism are incredibly skilled people. Now, I know Logan's got to head off, so we're going to be quite quick here, even though there's at least 200 messages I would have loved to have gotten to. We've got Academy Apologia. I don't know if you've followed him at all, you guys. This is James, and it's an incredible YouTube channel. Go and check it out. James and I got to meet James in February at the former Adventist Fellowship. And never was an Adventist, but he's just got this interest in Adventism. The most disliked and active YouTube videos are those who announce they are no longer Adventists. These videos attract Adventists with the most hateful and attacking comments to the former Adventists. That is true. There's I don't know if you've noticed this, Logan, and maybe you haven't spoken out against Adventism or been seen to, as I sometimes am seen to be doing, which I vigorously claim I'm not. Those who do speak out and suggest any kind of critique often get bombarded with some pretty hateful stuff, and CMB, the ambassador Colin, is agreeing with that. Yeah,
that's probably not a big part of my experience because, and I was going to say this earlier, because the mantra I try and have is that no idea is above scrutiny, but no person is below dignity.
Yeah, that's gold.
Because I take that approach
again,
with I say no idea is above scrutiny, but no person is below dignity. And because I use that, I mean, people will literally say to me, I can't believe you've just deconstructed everything I believe. You've just absolutely trashed it, but you've done it in such a lovely way. I want to give you a hug. I'm very reluctant to burn people for ideas. Depending on what those ideas are, of course. Obviously, as you get to the pointier end of ideas, yes, sometimes you have to just say, no, absolutely, you are, you're done. But
it's a bell curve.
Absolutely. But I'm very much about, and so I don't get a lot of that sort of stuff. If I do put something online, on my opinions, most people, I try and always state it with a way that respects people's dignity. Although I'm happy to deconstruct the ideas.
Yeah, and I loved it. And one of the things my parents and my primary school teachers taught me that's absolute gold is I statements, you know.
Yeah.
So you say, I think this or I don't see that, you know. As soon as you say, and that's the trouble, there's fault on both sides. I love that comment you brought up, because we, you know, it's poor that former Adventists are getting attacked. But on the other hand, if you go on YouTube and go, the Adventist church is a cult, it's wrong, anybody who thinks 1844 is the go is a total idiot. You're using very attacking language and you're demeaning people, you know. Like, it's one thing to say, you know, like Logan does, well, I don't believe this and I don't believe that, and here's why. But it's not like you're wrong, you're an idiot.
Once you go down there,
I agree, and I think a common thread between the three of us is that we're default like that. I really think that's why we get on well. Having said that, I don't mind when there's a guy that I don't think he's watching today, Ray. He goes ballistic, and I love it. I love him, and I love that he's doing that. You know, I love that.
Well, it's entertaining, like this Tom Norris guy. Like, he fires up. It's entertaining. But I'm like, mate, a bit more tolerance and respect wouldn't go astray.
And one night I was trying to test and fix some tech problem, and it was midnight, and he happened to be up, and I just invited him on. I didn't know we were talking to anybody, and we ended up having this hour-long amazing conversation. If you want to kind of look into the psyche of someone that speaks the way you're talking about, Andrew and Logan, and then see some of the motives and some of the real soft underbelly, go and watch that interview with Ray, which was unexpected. So there's a place for people to just to be themselves. Like, one of the reasons I left was because one of those haters was really attacking me, and I was saying, I'm not even saying that. It still was going at me, and it just made me think so much that I actually am so grateful to that person. So I'm not calling that we have to have the Andrew, Logan, Peter method, but we have to allow ourselves to be in places where we're not so easily triggered. I know that word's been taken by other people now, but I'm using it in a different sense, where we can be a bit more thin-skinned. And honestly, Adventists are pretty light. They're easily triggered. Like, you can one guy said to me, he called me a tool of Satan. I said, stop being such a baby. A baby? Are you calling me a baby? I said, dude, you just called me a tool of Satan, which is worse. And so, you know, just thicken up that skin, Adventists. This is a good one. We're going to wrap up.
It amaze me, you know, like Romans 15 or 12, sorry, you know, as far as it is possible, live at peace with all men. I mean, this is pretty, you know, fundamental stuff. And I'm going, we need to be able to express ourselves. But if we're going to war, we've sort of missed something about the whole Christian message.
Yeah, it's very like turn the other cheek, you know, give the shirt off your back, go the extra mile. Adventists, once rolled up, they get super angry, super fast. Gospel Adventists, this is Stephen Beagles. I would rather someone leave for the right reasons than stay for the wrong ones. That's a good point. Now, look, we are going to wrap up. I do want to say something here that to those commenting and watching. Some of these comments are absolute gold, and I really want to address them and talk about them. There's just so many good ones there. But the problem with YouTube is they delete after we go live, they delete these amazing comments. They don't just leave them up there. So I would love if that, particularly today, because I think it's been a landmark and important conversation. Please, if you have written something you'd like to go down in as part of the legacy of this conversation and can be discussed, go to Facebook, go to SDA page, go to YouTube, and cut and paste your comments that you've got now, and please put them there, because that way Logan, Andrew, and myself, we can address them. Other people can have conversations about them. Motor Sapien has just said that the interview with Ray is a hidden gem. He openly admits he's angry and bitter. And I tell you, we laughed a lot in that conversation. It's a really good one. So, we do have to leave that. But one of the notions of Ray and myself being able to be good mates is again a reflection of how the three of us can be friends in our conversation. Is it possible for Adventists to be friends, Adventists and former Adventists? And I think we can say yes. That is the conclusion is yes, and that it does happen on the coalface, as Andrew talks about, that people can do it at an individual level. Maybe we've got some gold here. Logan and Andrew might be able to start some little movement there that offers support for those who have had mental health issues, that have left the church, that feel unheard, disgruntled, and are allowed to get some get an ear and can get some resources. That'd be brilliant. So does the church, is it ever going to maybe put out an official kind of neutral ground annual event for formers? Who knows? But there's something for any leaders watching today, and I know leaders are watching often. Come on the show. Great. But maybe think about it. Maybe it could be good. So the church doing something, Logan and others doing something on the outside, brilliant. If that happens, this has been a huge success. Closing words from Andrew and then Logan, if you've got any.
Yeah, well, it's been a great conversation, and I Logan is literally my best friend.
Yeah, see,
and it's good that love covers over a multitude of sins on both sides.
Do you guys live far from each other?
No, not we. Ironically, we don't see each other face to face that often, but often on the phone. Yeah, we live in the same city, only about 20 to 30 minutes away from each other.
Gold. I'm jealous. Yeah. So what were you saying? Sorry.
Yeah. So it's just it is possible, but you've really got to think. How do you do it? How do you be honest but respectful?
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, that's the heart of it. Absolutely. I think and that comes back to that integrity. And, I think if genuine friendships allow integrity between each other and to be able to be who you are, say how you feel about things, and the other person sort of understand you and care for you through a whole raft of different things. And Andrew has done that for me, over the years of visiting me when I was very sick in hospital, that sort of thing, and really cared for me and looked after me. So those things go far beyond minute differences in theological interpretation. I can guarantee you that. So, and I'm massively appreciative of that. And I think that a lot of people, if you've got the intent to say, right, can we continue this friendship? I think Adventists and ex-Adventists can definitely do that and have all that warmth and care and friendship that you had previously.
Brilliant.
Hey, can I just share one 30-second anecdote?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. In 2017, there were some people here who said, could we sort of have a reunion, of the youth, the Adventist youth in WA from the 80s and 90s. So we had this thing called the Not So Youth Rally. So we basically ran a youth rally, for old people, if you like, but that style. And we had Tony Knight, our old youth director, come and speak. Anyway, so, we sort of go, well, who used to who was the core team people back in the day that used to put these things together? And of course, one of them was Logan Smith. And to his credit, Logan Smith said, yeah, I'd love to be there. And he helped organise it. He acted in one of the dramas. And it was just a really, really cool day. And it was just another example where I was very happy for Logan to be involved. He was very happy to be involved. We understood what we were doing, what we weren't doing. It was just a great day.
Yep.
That is awesome.
Yep.
Some of my best memories are from doing music in Western Australia.
Yeah,
remember that.
Four walls, no ceiling.
Four walls, no ceiling,
man. What a time!
Someone videoed that whole program and eventually sent it to Glenn Roberts to pass on to me, and it found its way being left at the Newcastle University with a lecturer there to pass on to me, and it's never surfaced.
Oh, what a pity.
But I got to see a short clip of it, and it is electrifying. It is just incredible. Steve and I are singing and playing our music. Yep. The audience is going nuts. I sold more Four Walls, No Ceiling albums than I've ever done in 1 week.
Yep.
It was just an incredible time. So Western Australia's got a very interesting energy.
Yeah.
One last story. Remember there was a congress they had in Brisbane, I think, and we were the band, and it was New Year's Eve, and we were asked to play music. And it had been up until like 5 minutes to midnight, we were finally brought on because they kept having speakers and talks and stuff. And who was it? Barry Gain, I think, came up to me and said, now, just as we're about to go on, 5 minutes to midnight, the crowd is just so, we want to get the music going. We're just sick of sermons. And he said, just don't play any music that might lead to line dancing. I'm like,
what?
So we get up on stage. We started playing I'm a Believer. And Western Australian contingent went through the roof.
I know.
The PNG guys were like, what's going on here? And then everyone else caught on, and it was this explosion party. I get to my second song where I say, I don't know, another kind of that kind of a style. And all of a sudden there's a conga line going up behind me. Someone's diving off the stage, a stage dive.
It was Sweet Home Alabama.
And
it was Roy Van Morsel, I think, jumping off.
Oh, it was.
And Barry Gain comes up to the front of the stage. You've got to stop. You've got to stop. We're like 2 songs in. I said, can I just do Amazing Grace? Oh, okay. And I said, and hey, and this is literally on the stage, the music's going, conga line. I said, at least no one's line dancing.
It was amazing. It was amazing. That was.
So I have great memories of being an Adventist, and if they weren't so politically. Anyway, great chatting today. I've loved it.
Good. Fantastic.
And I know we've run out of time. Logan's got to go, so I'll have to chat with you guys another time. I've got to race off to Toronto. So we'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I'm interviewing Nancy Claiborne about her. She's a past Adventist. Next week, we've got, I can't see through, Rochelle Saminowicz. She's an author. She actually got a bit involved with polyamory. She's on. We've got Milton Hook and John Rosie are starting the lecture series. Milton and John are going to be insane. There'll be me not interrupting or sharing any anecdotes. You're going to love it, everybody. See you next time. Thank you.
See you guys.